There you go. All right, good afternoon. Go ahead and call the meeting to order. And John, I understand that Dennis is out today, so we'll let the record reflect that he's not here, but everybody else is. So, first order of business is public comment. Anybody wishing to speak, if you could come forward and speak into the microphone. And let me also remind everybody that there's a sign-in sheet in the back if you could sign in. Thank you. Anybody for public comment?
Good afternoon. Donna Stone, External Affairs at Worthington Country Club. I wish to speak on a couple of different things. One is the filter marsh that was brought up at the last meeting. I would really like, if at all possible, for someone to look at the possibility of a large filter marsh system that would divert into the Crew land. I think that this would be an excellent solution for the flow of the floodwater and also for the filtration of the floodwater going into any of the Imperial River Basin. The other thing that came on the radar this week, and ironically it's on the title of the article in the Spotlight, is the 951. It says off the mat but on the radar. If Route 75 is acting as a dam right now, this would compound the problem that we're having right now into the DRGR area or the flood area. I think that the Water Task Force, the City Council, really needs to stay on top of this issue, and I think that they really need to also present their concerns to the MPO on behalf of the Bonita residents, and I don't think that this is something that we should just ignore. I think that this is a very, very important issue. It's also going to really compound the traffic issues that we're concerned about coming off of Bonita Beach Road to Terry Street. This would act as an alternative highway, yes, an alternative exit ramp or exit route for emergencies, yes, but the traffic issues would be horrendous for this area. So I really hope that you put this in as one of your concerns from this committee. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else for public comment? Nobody. All right. Moving on, we're going to approve the minutes from the last meeting. Everybody have a chance to look at those? I personally like the fact that we went from the Bonita Mall to the Bonita Mull. Getting closer. So we're getting there. It is the Bonita Marl, M-A-R-L. Go ahead, Nicole.
I had on page 3 of 8, let's see, the 4th paragraph down, the last sentence talks about a mud flow 2000. I believe that's mod flow. And then in the 6th paragraph down, 3rd line from the bottom, where it talks about once the model was calibrated to observe the data, they ran and looked at fluxes. I believe that's the flux codes, which is FLUCCS. On page 4, in the first paragraph, which was a continuation from page 3, on the 2nd line, talks about Mr. Rawls stated if there are wells in the Achoppy limestone, it should be Ochoppy limestone. And let's see, in the 5th full paragraph, last line, and this is actually contained in a couple places. Instead of hydro period, it should be hydro period. And that's all that I had.
I'll move approval.
All right, I had a couple more changes, by the way. In the on page 4 again, on the 7th paragraph, I assume there's a coalition between the depth of water and amount it recharges. I think that's correlation. There's a coalition. I want to know about it. On page 5, the third full paragraph, and the very last line, it said the receding area. I think that was supposed to be receiving. And then, that was page 5, the third paragraph, the very last line. And then the sixth full paragraph, about midway through, it talks about the C-43 specifically are some fairly high hydraulic activity rock. I think that's connectivity. I think that's it. So column move to approve, I assume as modified. We have a second?
Second.
Second. All those in favor? Aye. Any opposed? All right. I think that was the record number of fewest changes, so excellent. We're getting there. Beautiful. All right, Dave Loveland. Talk about traffic and roads and fun stuff like that.
Good afternoon, members. For the record, I'm Dave Loveland, Lee County DOT Director. And I want to start by explaining that I'm not an engineer. I'm actually a planner by trade and education, so it's a little unusual for a DOT director. So if you're looking for an engineer to talk about hydraulic flow and all those kind of things, that's not me. I can talk about the long-range plans and tell you what kind of roads are planned in the area that you're looking at, which is what I'm here for today. And I will say this, in my dealings with engineers over the years, when it comes to a roadway, an engineer will tell you, you can design and engineer a road to do anything you want it to do. If you want it to hold water back, it can hold water back. If you want it to pass water through, it can pass water through. It all really comes down to how much money you're willing to spend. What I brought with me today are some maps of the long-range plans for the county, and then one facility I know you're interested in particular, the potential County Road 951 extension. And I see some familiar faces up here that were part of some of our discussions in earlier years, so you might have heard some of this before. Let me give you a little context for the long-range planning process just so you understand where these come from. The Lee County Metropolitan Planning Organization, or MPO, is a planning body that does transportation planning for Lee County on a regional basis. It's required to exist by federal and state law because of the size of our urbanized area. It's made up, their policy board is made up of elected officials from the Lee County Commission and all 5 of the cities. So they're all working together to identify a long-range plan that goes out at least 20 years into the future. They also have the responsibility of directing how state and federal funding is allocated through a prioritization process that they do. What I provided to you, this top page here then, is part of the MPO long-range plan. Right now they have a plan that goes out to the year 2035. They're just getting ready to get underway with an update of that plan to extend the horizon year to the year 2040. That has to be completed under a deadline they have from the feds by the end of December, or by December 15th of 2015. The long-range plan is developed by projecting growth throughout the county. That is plugged into a computerized travel demand model that makes some assumptions about how traffic then gets assigned to the network and tries to determine then what roadways are overloaded, so then you can add facilities as needed to try to address that. The MPO does their planning effort kind of in 2 stages. And this top map is the first stage of that. They develop what they call a needs plan. It's those facilities they've identified as needed through the planning horizon through 2035 without consideration of cost. So in looking at the area east of I-75 then, down at the bottom of the map, there's not a whole lot actually shown in the needs plan in that area. You've got an improvement at the Bonita Beach Road interchange. You've got 6-laning of Bonita Beach Road over to Bonita Grand Drive. You got 4-laning on Bonita Grand Drive and on East Terry Street. And then this is showing a Logan Boulevard extension coming up to Bonita Beach Road, coming up from Collier County. The MPO then takes the long-range plan, it has cost figures then for every project. It projects the expected available revenues into the future and matches those up and develops what it calls a cost feasible plan, which is the second map. So that is the long-range plan then constrained back to basically to what you think you can afford, because there's always more needs than dollars. So as you can see on the cost feasible plan, then that Logan Boulevard extension actually drops out, and the interchange improvement at the interstate, and so you still have the 6 laning on Bonita Beach Road, widening of Bonita Grand Drive and East Terry Street. From the standpoint of the county, Bonita Beach Road is our road. We have an interlocal agreement with the city of Bonita Springs to jointly fund improvements to different parts of Bonita Beach Road, including this segment to go from 4 lane to 6 lane, whereby the city is committing some of the impact fees they would be generating from properties out east to help pay for that improvement. The East Terry Street is a City of Bonita Springs road, so that would be their responsibility for 4-laning that. Bonita Grand Drive, this portion from East Terry Street down to Bonita Beach Road is currently a county road. We'd like to see it be a City of Bonita Springs road at some point in the future, because that is not a high priority road for the county.
Go ahead and fix it up and give it to us. We're fine.
Yeah. What you'll notice is not on here, and what I'm going to talk about next is a large portion of the County Road 951 extension. That facility running from the Collier County line all the way up to Alico Road and a little north and tying into an east-west road was part of the 2035 plan at one time. The MPO, based on comments they were getting from the public, from Nicole's group and the Estero Council community leaders and people like that, were talking to the MPO board and objecting to 951 being in the plans. The MPO removed it from the long-range plan from Corkscrew Road south all the way to the county line. So the portion from Corkscrew Road north to Alico is actually still in the long-range plan. So where does that leave us?
One question
Colin?
about this
Yeah.
particular map. What are the little green rectangles on here? There's one down at the very bottom, there's one on Corkscrew, a couple in Bonita, one up there on their quad. See them?
The pink diamonds?
No, they're little green rectangles along certain roads. Well, they're 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, about 8 of them.
Rectangles.
Yes, little rectangles of green with a white border around the edge of them. Very small.
Little green rectangles on
Yeah.
Corkscrew Road?
Yeah, there are about 8 of them on there.
Third chart.
What?
Here on the third chart.
Oh,
Yeah, that's
I'm
right,
sorry.
we were just talking about that 951, so. This is the 951 extension chart. Because there's no legend on here that contains them.
All right, I think what those are, this was intended to map the alignment that was being considered as we were going through the PD&E study. Originally, it was developed from a map that had a number of alternatives on it. I think those are just remnants of some other alternatives that didn't get taken off of the map.
Okay. I just,
So let me explain where we were in the whole 951 process that led to the development of this map. The county has invested a lot of money in developing additional north-south roadway corridors for Lee County parallel to the interstate. The interstate system is developed really for long-distance travel. It wasn't really intended to be a facility providing local trips where people get on on one interchange, get off at the next interchange. So we have invested a lot of money in some parallel roadways to the interstate, more to help address local traffic needs and also to help increase the amount of north-south roadway capacity that we have. And there's been a dramatic increase from 20 years ago when we started talking about this. 41 now has 6 lanes on it. I-75 now has 6 lanes on it. We have the Imperial, Livingston Imperial Three Oaks corridor on the west side of the interstate, which connects all the way from Radio Road in Collier County all the way up to Alico Road and just north of Alico Road right now, with the intention ultimately to get up to Daniels Parkway. And that's a 4-lane corridor, expandable to 6. On the east side of the interstate, we have the Ben Hill Griffin tree line corridor that connects from Corkscrew Road up to Colonial Boulevard. And there is a concept to potentially get it from Colonial Boulevard up to State Road 82. And so the 951 extension was viewed as part of that network, that system, to help provide some additional north-south capacity on the east side of the interstate. In the early 2000s, we had a lot of discussion about alignment options, and there was some development activity sort of happening in the potential path, and there were a lot of questions. All right, where exactly is the road going to be, you know, for any potential development to work around? We decided to move forward with an alignment study to try to identify the potential alignment, something that could potentially be permittable, you know, recognizing obviously that you have a lot of environmentally sensitive lands that you have to go through to make something like that happen, both in terms of wetland impacts and wildlife impacts. And when I mentioned the federal process a little earlier, this study effort was a little unusual from the county's perspective. When the county does a road project, we can do a corridor alignment study or a preliminary design study if we feel the need to try to sort out alignment options, but we don't always do that. And so most of our projects start with a design permitting phase for a particular improvement. We go to the right-of-way acquisition phase, then we go to a construction phase. And each phase can take 2 years and cost millions of dollars. The state DOT, because they're using state and federal money, has an extra step in that process. They have to do a preliminary study. They call it a project development and environmental study at the start as a first step to identify all the potential environmental and community impacts and evaluate alternatives through a prescribed process. The county doesn't normally follow that process because we're not using state and federal dollars for our improvements. But we elected to go through that PD&E process for 951 because of the environmentally sensitive lands that were going to be potentially affected here, and because that was a prescribed process that brought all the environmental permitting agencies to the table. So they all have a role in that process of reviewing the options that come out of a PD&E study. The county went through multiple years of effort to look at a myriad of alternatives. This is a 14-mile section from Immokalee Road in Collier County all the way up to Alico Road. So it's a very long facility with a lot of potential impacts, and we had a lot of options thrown at us. We had a bunch of public meetings, people working in groups to try to identify alignment options. Tori participated all through that process. I think Cullen was there too. And Nicole, you might have been there as well. We worked through a number of alignment options, assessed the different impacts of all those options, and ultimately came up with a recommended alignment that's shown on this map that went to our Board of County Commissioners and was approved by the board in 2005. It's a single line everywhere except across one piece of property which is the Edison Farms property. There's two different alignment options shown across there. One that swings over adjacent to the interstate and then comes back. One that stays on the power line easement alignment. Because we were leaving that door open as to what made the most sense to determine at some point in the future. So the Board of County Commissioners ultimately approved this alignment. From that point, the PD&E study didn't really go any further. We never got federal sign-off, final federal sign-off on it. So we elected not to continue spending money on it, having to update all the information and keep going. We thought 5 years was long enough for evaluating that. But we do have a recommended alignment that was approved by the Board of County Commissioners. So that's kind of where we stand. That alignment, again, was approved in 2005. The facility is not actually part of the long-range plans at this point, at least from Corkscrew Road south. So there's no effort to move forward with any element of this anytime soon. There's no money budgeted. This will be an extremely expensive project. Our cost estimates at the time were about $500 million.
Just for the 14 miles? Or for the whole project?
For the whole project, for the whole 14 miles, designing, permitting, mitigation, right-of-way acquisition, and construction. The county does own a couple of pieces of right-of-way within the path. Just south of Corkscrew Road, there's some property that we own, and just north of Corkscrew Road through Grandeza, the county owns property along that alignment. And I think there was a piece right where the roadway comes north from Bonita Beach Road and then curves along the Keogh Canal. I think there was a piece there that we might have purchased too. But it's not active at this point. We're not doing anything else with it at this point. There has been some conversation at the MPO level. The Collier staff brought up at the last joint MPO meeting twice a year. The Lee and Collier MPOs meet together to talk about issues of mutual concern. And at the last one in March, the Collier staff, the growth management transportation director, I'm never that clear on the titles there, but had made a presentation to the joint MPOs about the idea of potentially adding the whole 951 extension back into the long-range plans. Lee MPO is not inclined to make any major changes to our long-range plan at this point in time because they're getting ready to go into this plan update process to develop a new plan. So issues like that can be evaluated as part of developing the new long-range plan for the 2040 horizon year. So that's where we stand on the roadway issues east of the interstate. Any questions?
I would like to address the issue of the traffic, all the development in North Collier County and East Collier County, directing north towards the airport, coming into Lee County, either on our various north-south corridors. And the one that concerns me the most is the Santa Barbara-Logan extension, and it delivering a substantial amount of traffic onto Bonita Beach Road. In my experience, there are a lot of stoplights on Bonita Beach Road in that area of the interchange to the Livingston extension. And so a lot of people already, without the increase in population, are using Bonita Grand to Terry Street to get to Three Oaks. They just kind of cut that way and head north up towards the airport. So what is your understanding of the traffic? They seem to be building and building in East Collier, and it's going to come through Bonita to the north one way or the other. So this concern of mine being Beach Road and Bonita Grand, and then, of course, the Terry Street Bridge. I know that you don't have to pay for the Terry Street Bridge, but we do. So, I just wanted you to talk a little bit about what your understanding of how much development is going on out in that Immokalee area and East Collier.
this is an aerial from 2005, and you can sort of see some of the planned development that was already envisioned even that far back in the eastern part of Collier County, and even in Lee County on the south side of Bonita Beach Road. And that kind of development in the east part of Collier County, you've got Ave Maria way out east now, and development happening around there, combined with the regional attractors that Lee County has on the east side of the interstate, Florida Gulf Coast University, the Southwest Florida International Airport, is part of what creates the demand for a corridor like this, like 951, because we're not assuming much development for the DRGR area. That's not really the issue, but there is a lot of expected demand coming from the east part of Collier County, trying to get to some big regional attractors on the east side of the interstate in Lee County, and their options are going to be the interstate and the Imperial Livingston Three Oaks corridor at this point. I don't have a good answer as to how much traffic is coming up Livingston Road. My understanding of the way that road was proposed, and I'll admit I'm not up to speed with what Collier County's plans are currently, but it was going to be a 2-lane road extension only, not 4 lanes, built by a developer, and I'm not clear if that's what's happening or if Collier's helping fund it. Yeah, the Logan Boulevard extension. You can sort of see a line on this old aerial where there's a road that kind of weaves through coming up from where Logan would be. It then gets on the alignment of where the 951 extension ultimately was expected to be to get up to Bonita Beach Road.
And let me jump in. My understanding is that at that point where you kind of see that squiggly line, that is going to be 2-laned from there up, then straight up into Bonita Beach Road and terminates at Bonita Beach Road. And that is probably only about 3 years away.
So how much traffic that will bring up to Bonita Beach Road, I don't have the numbers for that. I'd have to check with Collier County staff if they have some projections for that. I understand the concern that you're expressing. I guess the question becomes, because these are all public roads, how do you limit that?
Well, I don't believe you can, personally, being from Southern California. I mean, people come and they drive. But the part that I'm addressing is even without the 951 extension, which I've never been a big fan of, it's the widening of Bonita Grande and the limitation of the Terry Street Bridge without even an increased density. And then paying for that. Because who's going to pay for the Bonita Grande one? And who's going to pay for the Terry Street widening, right? So the city has to put into both, and then Lee County helps with the Bonita Grande one, or?
That's yet to be determined. It's right now that Bonita Grand Drive is the county's responsibility. I don't think we're going to be quick to start throwing money at that. Here's part of the issue that you're dealing with. Those roadways aren't overloaded right now in terms of the capacity. So there is some room to accept some more traffic. I'm not sure how much more before they get to the point where you'd have to start looking at widening those. I don't know how much time.
So they're not failing enough yet for you to step in?
No, not at this point.
Okay.
And in Dave's defense, I mean, we're obviously looking at those same issues, but don't have dollars allocated to particular types of projects at this point, because first, again, we have to wait and see what Logan does when it's brought up, and then do the counts, then see where people are using the existing network and to what extent. I understand what you're saying. Your concern is that people traveling north from that eastern part of Collier County will go west on Bonita Beach Road, north on Bonita Grand, over Terry to Imperial to go further north. On the other hand, they may just go to Bonita Beach Road, go west and hit the interstate or if they want to avoid the interstate, go over to Imperial and hit that there. We can kind of guess where those patterns are going to be, but until we see that, we won't know where the dollars are going to be best spent.
Right. My reason of bringing it up, though, is because of the idea of allowing some increase in density in the DRGR. I think part of the Baracco study was to say if we were to allow some increase in density, then funding would come in to help provide for the road improvements, which would, add to the coffers to getting these roads done. Because I think that some people have been under the belief that if we do not increase the density in the DRGR at all, then we will not need to expand the roads. And that is not my understanding from what action I see happening in Collier County. And that's what I was looking for, an opinion, if you're allowed to give one, or what your understanding is of the traffic through. If 951's off the table and they are developing and sending the traffic through Bonita, then these roads are going to have to be brought up whether we increase density or not. Is that your understanding?
Well, again, I don't have the projections with the Logan Boulevard extension added in, but if you look at the needs plan map, it is assuming Logan Boulevard coming up to Bonita Beach Road, and the need by 2035, at least, to 4-lane Bonita Grand Drive and East Terry Street.
Right.
And that's without projecting in any further development in the DRGR. That's
Correct.
just based on traffic patterns.
That's right. Thank you.
And Dave, real quick, on the legend, when it says 2 lanes FF, what does the FF mean? Is it like fully funded, or?
I think those were the tolls.
It's telling you, the needs plan map is trying to show you both the needs plan and the financially feasible plan, so FF is financially feasible. So they got some color coding for some of this where they're trying to show you that as well.
Thank you, though, for the wishful thinking that it was fully funded.
Fully funded. That's always the optimist.
I
Come on.
appreciate it.
John, what are we doing with all the impact money that we're going to collect from all those homes that are being built out at the east end of Bonita Beach Road?
Yeah, I think those funds are already committed to the improvements on Bonita Beach Road. That was part of our agreements with the county and going
Which
forward.
is
That interlocal agreement that I mentioned, the city's
where we're
50%
paying
share
for
is coming
part
from.
of widening Bonita Beach Road.
Yes.
As we have for the other segments that are already
Right,
done.
the city's already done that for some other pieces of Bonita Beach Road. That's the basis of our interlocal agreement.
Dave, in going back, and it was several years ago that for the 2035 plan, we looked at the information, but as I recall, of course, there were the environmental considerations as far as the 951 extension, which gets it to the $500 million plus, and that certainly was one of the factors that the MPO looked at, but also in looking at the traffic projections. I think that a pretty good case was made that if 951 was not there, where the traffic would be distributed, added traffic, of course, to other roads, but it didn't cause any roads to fail, except for those roads that were failing anyway. So I think that part of the MPO's decision was this is going to be one of the most expensive roads out there. It's going to need to be tolled, which you can't do if you have the tolls on I-75, which at least at the 2035 planning process, the MPO was looking towards. So it was a whole list of concerns and considerations that went into that decision that, you know what, let's try to deal with the traffic in other ways. And I think that one of the issues with the Logan and the 951, I agree, if you have what would be 6 lanes of traffic converging onto Bonita Beach Road is a problem. But Logan is only going to be 2 lanes. And so if the Collier portion of the 951 extension were removed, then you'd have a much more manageable amount of traffic that comes in at Bonita Beach Road, so.
And I think if 951 ever actually happened coming up to Bonita Beach Road, it would absorb that part of Logan. It wouldn't be 2 + 4, 6.
So it would just be
It would be
4.
4 with Logan teeing into it at
Still,
some point. But
6 lanes
Yeah.
converging into 4, converging into,
We-
yeah.
it just depends on the situation. I mean, we have those kind of transitions everywhere. I mean, every 6-lane road we have doesn't stay 6 lanes, for 200 miles. It just at some point you end up dropping lanes and narrowing down.
And when you were planning this, when we were all looking at this 951 extension, was Ave Maria at that time and the development in that, not just northeast Collier County, but even further east? There's so much more development out there now.
I think it was in the early stages, and I'm not sure the growth forecast fully recognized kind of
Right, the extent to which Collier
to the
would
extent it was
develop.
going to grow. One thing about the traffic issue that Nicole mentioned too, I just wanted to mention, when the MPO was doing some testing of if you take 951 out of the long-range plan, what is the effect of that? If you'll notice in the needs plan for the interstate assumes there's 10 lanes on the interstate. 6 lanes plus 4 additional, more limited access type lanes, specialty lanes. I think as time has gone, and there was a lot of debate about that and those extra lanes potentially being tolled lanes. I spent a lot of time in this room serving as staff for the Southwest Florida Expressway Authority as it was trying to get off the ground and figure out how to pay for something like that, and ultimately nothing ever came of that. And I think it's highly doubtful that we're actually going to get to 10 lanes on the interstate. So, if 6 lanes that we have out there today ends up being all that we have, then the capacity issues of potentially another corridor has to be part of the discussion.
Any other questions?
Thanks, Dave. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
I would like to extend my thanks again to Dave and the county folks for sending Dave down. We had to do a little schedule juggling, as you know. He's a very popular guy. People
Busy
want to
guy,
hear from him.
And I assume the maps that he provided are going to be put up on the web?
Yes, they are.
Perfect. All right. All right, the mine people. Did you bring some boring logs for us? I'm joking. I just love that. Boring logs.
Only for Christmas.
Well, I'll start off the boring part here, but anyway. Hello, everyone. I'm George Jonas. I'm the Chief Restructuring Officer for Propertize, which is the legal owner of the mine, which is a subsidiary of the bank. First of all, I want to thank you all for taking the time to come out and do a mine tour. It was nice to be able to dialogue informally with y'all versus this kind of formal setting and to show you what we're doing. Mr. Hasty, we're going to have to get you out there before it's all said and done. When the bank took over the mine, they asked me to put together the strongest team that I could to figure out what to do and how to do it with this rather unusual asset, at least for them. This area is really fortunate. There's a lot of very strong consultants, advisors, engineers, et cetera, that one can choose from. And I think the team that we've put together is a pretty strong team. Their professional experience, their education, their integrity, I believe, is above reproach. I'm just going to give you a few comments on each. David Depew, partner of Morris Depew, has been doing business here. Many of you know him for over 25 years. David previously was a director of community development for Lee County, essentially responsible for all their planning and permitting activities. I believe he managed the revisions that were made to Lee County's land development regulations and comprehensive plan, both products that were recognized statewide as being, as being good. He can tell you what they're recognized as anyway. David's also a certified planner. He has a heavy knowledge of transportation, permitting, and policy matters, and he has a list of accreditations here. Degrees are too long. He didn't pay me to get into these, so sit on David. His partner, Bill Morris, is the professional engineer. Actually, he's been the engineer of record for the mine for the last 11 years, so he knows a great deal about the mine, its operation, its excavation, the water situation, et cetera. Bill is recognized in numerous jurisdictions, including Bonita Springs, as being an expert in civil engineering, including stormwater management, engineering, and traffic engineering. Craig Smith is our ecologist. Craig's a no-nonsense, straightforward guy who has been doing this for over 25 years in Florida. He currently works for Dex Bender. I remember Dex Bender in the 80s when he first started his firm. Actually, he went in business with a former state senator, Mr. Wilbur Boyd. They were chopping Melaleuca and selling it as packaged mulch. Problem is the mulch floated away when the rain came, so it didn't work out too well. But Dex has got a long legacy. He's moving on to other things, but his firm, the legacy of his firm, I think is being carried on by people like Craig. Craig is a senior ecologist that is certified by the Society of the Ecological Society of America. He's also a professional wetland scientist accredited by the Society of Wetland Scientists. I'd love to see your business card. What is that? What do you have on there? So he specializes in wetland evaluation, permitting mitigation, wetland monitoring, et cetera. Rounding out our team is Dave Brown of Progressive Water Resources. Dave is our geologist whose specialty is geology and groundwater hydrology. Basically, he's a very heavy-duty water guy. A challenge with Dave I have is he's really so smart that he says things, and I have to have him repeat it to me 2 and 3 times because I don't understand exactly what he's trying to tell me. But he's very experienced, very passionate, very immersed in all this. All our team is very smart. I would encourage you to ask any and all questions that you have. They're a free resource to you. Not a free resource to me, but there's available for you also. Please ask any and all questions you have. We don't necessarily think we have all the answers. We're trying to look at things as objectively as we can and continue to dialogue with you all and the professionals that you bring on. As a matter of fact, after the meeting, we're going to be, our team's going to be sitting down with Mr. Kopp and discussing in more details some of the things that we're going to present today. So we look forward to continue working with you, and hopefully this presentation will be of interest. And again, please ask anything you need to. We got the team here to respond to it. So with that, we're going to start with Bill Morris.
Thank you, George. I think I've had the pleasure of meeting most of you, but just for the record, my name is Bill Morris with Morris DePue Associates. The characteristics of Bonita Grand site, as many of you know, it's a 1,200-odd acre site that is currently permitted, zoned for mining uses. The characteristics of the site work out to about a third of the site is reserved for mining, about a third of the site is being preserved under various conservation easements, and another third of the site is utilized by the operation. And those of you who have had the opportunity to come out to the site have witnessed what that largely entails. And for those of you who haven't, I will be giving you a little bit of definition for that later. The the history of the mine. 1987, Section 20, which is the southern square mile of the mine site, was zoned for excavation. And the northern section, Section 17, was added to that in 1990. That form of excavation consisted of essentially a sand mine, where they were allowed to remove the overburden but not get into largely get into the limestone at that point in time. In 2003, there was a modification to the zoning and permitting that allowed them to dig to a maximum depth of 90 feet. And that was the point at which it converted from a sand pit to an aggregate mine. In 2003, the mine was also annexed into the city of Bonita Springs. In 2013, a comp plan amendment was filed to convert or to provide some residential density for the land. Currently, under the current approvals, the mining expiration is set in the city of Bonita Springs zoning for 2020. The existing mining operation in the 400-odd acres of land where the mining takes place those of you who've been out to the site have seen how the mine drills a series of holes for blasting, fragments the rock, and then removes it with the drag lines. Picture of drag line you see here, an aerial view of it there. That is the pile of material that the drag line is removing from the pit. I would like to note again, we've said it a number of times, and I did want to note one more time that this operation does not, under any circumstances, penetrate through the marl strata of the ground. It just simply does not. For those of you who don't know, the marl is a material that is not. It's not an economic material to obtain. It is a material that is counterproductive for a construction aggregate mining operation to try to deal with. It actually contaminates the material if they get into it. So based on that factor alone, they do their absolute best to not mix with it at all. And another characteristic of this site that I think has been confused over a period of time is that there is no dewatering of this site.
I'm sorry, what does that mean?
They don't draw down the water in order to extract the lime rock once they have shot it. Once the aggregate is thrown on the pile, it is then transported to the processing plant, and there are a number of there's a central processing plant, and there's several small portable plants that are used on the site. These are where the aggregate is crushed to specific sizes and it's washed. And the washing is an aspect of this that is important to note because based on the fact that this operation washes in the manner that we do, we don't discharge stormwater. Our permits require us to retain the stormwater for up to the 25-year, 3-day stage. Upon the completion of the mining, we have an approved reclamation plan that has been that is a part of our permits with the Florida Department of Environmental Protection as well as the City of Bonita Springs. And this plan essentially calls for resloping, recontouring of the lake slope, the lake shorelines, as well as the installation of a nominal amount of littoral plantings, and the mining equipment, the industrial equipment will be removed. And that concludes my portion of the presentation, and I will turn over to Craig Smith to discuss the ecology of the site.
Hey, Bill, real quick.
Yes.
Do you know, from a timing perspective, was the permit that allowed you to go down and get the limestone issued prior to the annexation?
Yes,
Okay, it was listed that way, but I just want to confirm.
that is correct. That
Perfect.
was the chronology of the approvals.
Perfect, thanks.
Forward, backward. Laser.
Okay. Good afternoon. For the record, my name is Craig Smith. I am a senior ecologist with Dex Bender and Associate, and despite being the best dressed member on the team, I'm actually more at home out in the woods than I am here. I've been working as an environmental consultant since '87, and I have been working on the mine since about 2006. And since in 2009, I worked on the preserve area management plan for the mine and have been helping the mine implement that project ever since. As you can see on the aerial, the land uses north and south of the mine are predominantly agriculture, with some small areas of wetland. To the west, it's predominantly agriculture, with some development further west than that. To the east, the lands are predominantly the Flint Pent Strand, which is mostly owned and managed by the Water Management District. I believe the county owns a few parcels there, and there are also a few private in-holdings that remain. On the mine itself, we have approximately 384 acres of preserves, and as you can see, the majority of those preserves are located along the east property line. This aerial was flown in 2013. It shows the current vegetative communities on site. Approximately 330 acres of native wetlands occur. Those are mostly cypress swamp, pine cypress, and created marsh. There's also about 38 acres of native uplands, primarily up in the northeast corner. The remaining 900 acres or so are the mining lakes and associated processing areas. As Bill said, we have a environmental resource permit. That permit requires us to preserve and enhance 370 acres of uplands and wetlands. In addition to that, the city of Bonita Springs requires 14 acres of created native open space, which are located both on the north and south property lines. The entire 384 acres are subject to maintenance and monitoring pursuant to the 2009 Preserve Area Management Plan that was reviewed and has been approved by the city.
Is there a conservation easement over all of those preserves?
Not all of them. The preserves for the DEP, the 370, those are under conservation easement. I believe the open space areas are just in separate tracts, but they are not subject to an easement that I am aware of. Of the preserves, approximately 73 are located in the interior or western portion of the site. These are range in size from slightly under 2 acres to slightly over 16 and a half, and they are predominantly preserved cypress with adjacent areas of created freshwater marsh, as you can see in that slide. Along the eastern property line is where the majority of the preserves are, totaling about 311 acres. It's important to note, as shown in that purple or magenta line, the preserves themselves are isolated from all of the mining activities. There are other berms that were interior to the preserves that have actually been removed. So now that 311 acres is contiguous and has a surface water connection with the Flint Pen Strand. These preserves are primarily cypress and cypress pine with some areas of created freshwater marsh, and the uplands I mentioned before are up in the northeast corner. As Bill touched on, once mining is done, we have a reclamation plan. That reclamation plan will consist, as far as the lakes are concerned, of resloping the side slopes and some minor plantings keyed to stabilize those side slopes. As a result, the vegetation in the littoral zone will be largely what recruits in by itself and may be somewhat patchy in distribution. Typically, there's also limited long-term maintenance required for those areas under the DEP. And in contrast, as I'm sure you're aware, the slides on the bottom part, the photos on the bottom part of the slide are of more residential type developments where the lakes are actually planted with a variety of different species, and there is actual maintenance to make sure that those plants thrive and that exotic and nuisance species are kept to a minimum.
Excuse me, if the city were to buy the land, what would they expect to find as far as water quality? I mean, it would have to be cleaned up and changed before it could be habitable or used for something else, or what's it look like?
I'm not a water quality expert, but it's my understanding from what I've seen on other mines is that it's basically groundwater. So once the mining is ceased operations, there's nothing.
There's no chemicals involved?
Again, I'm not a water quality expert. Perhaps David, who's up next, could address those concerns or issues.
Thank you.
In conclusion, there's 384 acres of on-site preserves. All of those areas are subject to long-term maintenance responsibilities, which includes regular exotic treatments and monitoring. Estimated costs for those sorts of activities are between $25,000 and $30,000 per year. And approximately 311 acres of our preserves are immediately adjacent to and contiguous with the Flint Pen Strand. That concludes my presentation. Unless there are any questions, and I'll turn it over to David Brown to talk about the hydrogeology of the area.
Let me ask you one question about the ecology of the lake after all of the mining is over with. What would you expect in the water in the way of fish?
There'll be some. It'll depend on what recruits in from other areas. It all depends on if there's any stocking program, if it's just whatever fish can find their way in, since there is no.
But you'd expect the water quality to be suitable to,
Yes.
to allow fish to live
Yes.
in.
Are
Right
there
now,
fish there now, aren't there?
I assume there. I have not been allowed to do any fishing in the lake.
Swimming, though.
My
right?
waders aren't. No, I've tried not to swim the lake. I've swam the wetlands, but not the lakes. And there is life in the wetlands.
Excellent. Thank you.
Good afternoon. I'm David Brown. I'm a senior professional geologist at our firm and one of the principals at Progressive Water Resources. I have a lot of information that we're going to walk through today, okay? And I'm going to do it in about 15 minutes, but I'm going to do it and I have a lofty task of trying to impart on all of you some better understanding of the hydrogeology of the site. I've attended a meeting and I've watched several on video, so I've seen some of the questions and some of the comments that have been made, and so we'll try today to provide some clarity to some of the questions that you have had from other professionals as you've gone through. And I think you all have seen that this is, it's somewhat complex. I mean, Florida has been described as layer cake geology, and in some instances that's true, but when you get into hydrogeology, things start getting more complex. First off, let's talk a little bit more about mining, and we'll get into some water quality here as well. It's a closed-loop system, all right? We have lakes that are formed from the excavation. Water is withdrawn from surface water pumps from those lakes. It is brought into the plant area, which is in the center right here. So here's kind of a close-up of it right here, and I'll put you guys on the field trip. You probably looked at it. But water is brought into the plant area by some pumps. It is used as part of the sorting process, okay, and flushing off some of those fine materials that are off of it. Limestone is composed of very small particles. And then it's stockpiled, okay, in various grades. And then that water is circulated back out to the pits. So basically what you have is kind of this circular flow path of water, all right?
Excuse me,
Yep.
but that implies there's no leakage outside the mined area?
What do you mean by leakage? We're going to get into quite a bit on leakage, so let me...
Okay.
Okay, stormwater, we just heard, is not being allowed to discharge. But in a moment, we'll get into great detail on groundwater, all right? So I'm talking about, so within the water table, we are circulating water around and around. You can see this circulation if you look on some of these images. Whoop, we went back. If you look right here, you can see kind of this opaque color. Limestone is white, small particles. And from the circulation process, you can see they get suspended in the water column, all right? They settle out the moment that the circulation process is stopped, but that's why you see those different colors. But there's no chemicals involved in this process. It's basically just using water, hydraulically to wash, then that water is returned to the pits, all right? And then the limestone is crushed into various grades.
So Dave, before you, back
I'm
on
sorry?
that other slide, so would it be safe to say that northernmost lake is not connected? 'Cause
Correct. That is
turbidity
right. In
looks
this
a lot
picture, but
different.
this is a Google image. When you look at that, you can see that that's not part of the active recirculation area.
Got it.
All right, so you don't see that.
And how long generally does it take to settle, so to speak?
A month or two, generally.
Oh, that quick.
It can settle out pretty quick. You'll see a change in that. Now, the water will always remain blue because the pits are deep. Deep water absorbs kind of the red-orange end of the spectrum, and so they'll always look blue. But that color that you see, that kind of opaque turquoise color, that's just a reflection of sunlight from these small particles that are suspended in the water column.
So maybe
That's
the
all it
blue
is.
marl is right.
It's actually green. All right, why are we here? Okay, we got to get a little bit of geology. I'm a geologist. I got to talk about geology, and I promise not to be too complex in regards to this. This is a picture of the Tamiami Formation, pretty representative picture. Okay, and if you look at that, it's a poorly defined lithostratigraphic unit. What the heck does that mean? That means it's got a lot of stuff in there, a lot of different end members, a lot of components. So if you remember the layer cake analogy, there's a lot of stuff in this cake. It's got a lot of ingredients that are in there. So it contains a wide variety of mixed carbonates, okay, limestone, and associated faunas, fossils. You can see the shells that are over here. It's kind of a cemented shell matrix. all right? It occurs at or near land surface, that's why we're mining, and has named and unnamed components. Okay, geologists love to name stuff. Okay, we've got our all sorts of nomenclature. But if you run through this gives you an idea of the variety of materials that make up this unit. And those have a big role in its hydraulic properties, all right? So we have the Buckingham limestone member, the tan and clay sand unit, the oyster facies. Makes sense, it's composed of oyster shells predominantly. A sand facies, the Ochapi limestone member, the Bonita Springs marl, heard a lot about that, okay, and highlighted here. An unnamed limestone facies, the Golden Gate Reef member, and the Pinecrest sand member. So that's what they mean by poorly defined. It's got a lot of stuff in there, and it's highly variable, all right? But now the Bonita Springs marl, a lot of attention's been paid to this one particular unit, and it is a very important unit. It basically separates the Tamiami from the water table to the lower Tamiami aquifer, okay? So there is a nomenclature based on the occurrence of this particular unit. It's based on site-specific. Now that's what I'm concentrating today at the mine area in proximity to the mine. Based on site-specific boring logs, it is olive gray to dark gray-green in color. It's medium to high plasticity. What does that mean? It's plastic. You can move it. It's kind of like Play-Doh. It won't break, so you can mold it. So it's plastic. Soft to firm. It can be very dense, okay? Has a variable sand content, can have slight amount of sand to a little bit of sand in it. And it is certainly not used as a construction material, as stated before. Now what we're going to do, this is where the lessons begin, all right? We've made a vertical cross-section for several hundred feet right through the mining area, all right? So and there's a lot of things to kind of point out in regards to this. First, here's the mine pit. You heard before about when the mining operation first started, it was basically extracting sand, okay? And then basically geologists, that's an undifferentiated, unnamed sand unit. It's basically the overburden, composed of quartz sand, shell. If you dug a hole in your backyard, that's what you're digging in, okay? So that's basically undifferentiated sand and shell. But then we get into this unit right here, which is the top of the Tamiami. This is the limestone. Showed you a picture before that's currently being extracted, and you can see the mine pit superimposed on this, okay? And this has been designated as the upper limestone member or the upper Tamiami, and it composes what is called the water table aquifer. So now we're starting to superimpose hydrologic features or aquifers on top of the geology. And you see we have kind of this, layer cake concept here, and then we have the Bonita Springs marl, all right? And you can see that it's tilted. All right, I'm going to show you evidence for that. So here we're on the west, it's about 44 feet from land surface. On the east, it could be as deep as 106 feet. So our layers are tilted. This clay unit extends underneath the mine, but it has an angle to it. Below that is the Ochapi member, okay? Another one of these kind of mixed up elements of a lot of components of the Tamiami formation, again, composed of a lot of those end members. And then below that, we've got another confining unit. And then below this, just to really complicate things, is the sandstone aquifer. So you've got these multiple layers composed of multiple types of rocks and sediments with confining units in between.
Where's the upper Tamiami aquifer?
Fred, can you speak into the microphone, please?
Where is the upper Tamiami aquifer?
Yeah.
It's also right, went past it. Right here. The upper Tamiami is the water table aquifer. All right, so then we have the lower Tamiami, known as the lower Tamiami aquifer. And what are aquifers? They can be water-bearing units, all right? Clay doesn't make much water, okay? It doesn't mean that they make a boatload of water, but they can produce some water. Now I'm really taking you on a journey. This is a contour map, all right? A lot of you guys may be familiar with contour maps. Now I'm looking down on the mine, all right? So I'm trying to show you some of the relief. These red dots are prospect borings that were performed within the mining area, all right? We've added in, these are a few from well logs, from the drilling of wells. They make a geologic log when they drill the well, and so you can identify it. And you can see along this, golly, this thing is sensitive. Get this? You can see along the western side, our contour lines and our values show that we have approximately 40 feet below land surface till we hit the Bonita Marl. And then it fairly rapidly drops off to where 60 feet, and then 80 feet, and you can see that value of 106. So literally, this thing is tilted, like I showed before, in this direction. And so this is done, this prospects borings are done so that they know how deep to mine. It's that simple. So they have an advanced knowledge of where you're at on the property, on how deep it is to the Bonita Marl, because again, the Bonita Marl, as far as the limestone is concerned, is unwanted. That's not what you want in the mining process. All right, now, we're done with geology. We're going to talk about recharge and hydrogeology. And now things are starting to get complex. Let's start with a basic definition of recharge. And again, from the USGS. And the USGS is always one of my primary sources of information. And a lot of the GS reports that have been performed in this area are done in concert with the South Florida Water Management District. So there's just a wealth of information that's available for anyone that's looking at it. This one in particular is recharge to the surficial aquifer in Lee and Hendry counties. Obviously very specific to the topic that we're talking about today. Recharge, what is it? Replenishment of groundwater by downward infiltration of water from, rainfall, streams, lakes, sinkholes, canals, or other sources. All right, we're familiar with that. Recharge rate, how fast does it get there? It's determined by the properties of the sediments. All right, and one particular term is permeability, how easily water can pass through something. Low permeability, obviously, it takes a long time. It may almost be prevented from passing through. High permeability, it goes through fairly quickly. But also then there's the thickness of the sediments. How thick are those sediments? Okay. In this case, just so you know, based on boring logs and some of the other information that was provided to you, the Bonita Marl is about 30 feet thick in this area. So we get an idea of kind of how thick this unit is. Okay. And that's the flow path encountered by this downward infiltration. And then what drives it? What makes it move? What makes water move? Okay, it's driven by a differential in water levels, that gradient. All right? Why do we pump water up in water towers? Because we impart a gradient to it. That's how we pressurize it. We put it up in water towers so that we can impart a pressure to it. So that's an extreme gradient, obviously, but that's a gradient. But if you're going to look at recharge, and I've spent the better part of my career, I'm a groundwater flow modeler, and also was trained as a classic field geologist. If you're going to talk about recharge, you have to look at everything collectively. You really got to look at the confining units. What are they composed of? Where's the water table at? Where's the average water level? Okay. Differentials in water level, we understand that. That's the driving force. But we also have to look at water quality, both above and below. Now, I'm talking about the native groundwater. What are the dissolved constituents in that groundwater? Because that plays a key role in the understanding of how much recharge may be occurring. All right. What do? We look through these reports. We look up wells. We look up monitor wells. We look at long-term records. You can see the property here outlined in red. I looked at 3 monitor wells. Preferably, we would have those monitor wells right next to one another, in a cluster. They don't occur that way, but land surface is relatively flat here. Potentiometric surface, or the water levels, are relatively flat, and so they can be compared to give us a concept idea of what's going on here in regards to water. So we're looking at 3 monitor wells, USGS monitor wells. Also, they've been long-term records from the district. We're looking at L2195. It's a water table aquifer. That's that part above the Bonita Marl. I told you got to watch my hands and the slides. I use my hands a lot. So we've got a monitor well that's exclusively open to that water table. All right, then we've got one in the lower Tamiami. Now it is exclusively open to that lower Tamiami, so it's below the Bonita Marl. That's the open hole interval. So it's looking at the water level within that. And then below that is sandstone aquifer, just to kind of complicate things, and I'm not going to spend much time on it, but that gives you kind of this increasing depth from land surface, what we're going to be looking at. This is called a hydrograph. It's a graph of water over time. You've got dates along the bottom on the x-axis, so it doesn't have a very long record on it, but it's got 5 years, and we're looking at it. For today's purposes, that's just fine. This is elevation, okay? So we're looking at this green line, okay, and this is water levels, okay, through time. And you can see it's zigzagged. It's high during the rainy season, low during the dry season. High during the rainy season, low during the dry season. So it's very obvious how it oscillates back and forth, and generally within about 7 feet to about 14 feet is how much the water table is oscillating. All right? The same well, looking at the water quality in it, okay, and this particular well has about an average over this time frame of a chloride concentration. I'm using chloride. It's going to be an important constituent that we're looking at, okay, of 35 milligrams per liter, or parts per million. It's the same thing. Just for reference, drinking water standard is 250 milligrams per liter. All right, so 35 milligrams per liter. Seasonal variations, and I showed you some of the chloride content. This is the one I'm going to spend the most time on. This is where life gets difficult, as I said earlier. I've taken that same graph that we showed before, all right? Here it is, right up here, 35. And I've added another monitor well, the one below the Bonita Marl, all right? So this is one of the hardest concepts for people to understand, is that when you go through confining layers and you're looking at units above and below that confining layer, the water levels can be at different elevations. All right, so they mimic one another. You can see the highs and the lows, and you can see similarity, but they are at different elevations. This has a high of at about 8 and goes down to -2. So that's the range where it's oscillating. This one up above is oscillating like this. So literally, this one is perched above the water level below. What's separating these two water levels? The Bonita Marl. All right, so it is holding that water up above it. Here's an analogy. Your swimming pool is basically impervious at the bottom. It is holding the water up from leaking down into the surrounding water table, okay? So that's an extreme example, but that clay is holding that water level up. Obviously, when we see a difference in water level like this, you say, okay, there's a difference, and remember our definition of recharge. Now there is the potential, and I'm putting that in quotes, for water to want to move down, because I've got one water level higher than the other. But let's look at water quality. We've got a concentration of about 72 milligrams per liter down here, okay, over the same time frame. So we see this is more mineralized than this. So not only is this level held up and prevented from matching this, if there was no clay, they would only be one water level. They would not be separated. But we've got the clay, it's separating them. It's also showing you that we've got a difference in water quality as well between that. So we're starting to garner a picture that, hold on a minute, one is being supported above the other. They match in seasonality, but they don't cross one another. So they're being prevented from infiltration directly or mixing at a high rate. And we're seeing that we have a difference in water quality. So we definitely are showing signs, strong signs of confinement here. There's no doubt about it. Now to really make you crazy. I won't go long on this. This is the sandstone aquifer on top of this, that red line. Why is it so jagged? Much higher frequency data collection. The sandstone is a very important aquifer in this area. It's being monitored at a very, very high frequency looking at it. So you get this jagged line. So don't pay, all that is that the sampling rate is much higher, okay? But you'll see the same trends. The take-home message for this is, my goodness, it's in between the two. So as I'm going down vertically, water levels are getting more complex, all right? But that's, as far as I want to go into sandstone, I'm not here to talk about the sandstone. This particular report that I talked about used about 40 wells in Lee County. And they did a fantastic analysis on this one report. And again, if you suffer from insomnia, I highly recommend reading this report. And you'll see exactly the methodologies that they used. But I'm going to go through, this is the summation of this report. And generating recharge to the water table, to the very top, okay, to the very top of this geologic section. We'll start along the coast. Soils along here, right along the coast, annually 0 to 2 inches per year infiltrate. All right? And so when you think about infiltration and recharge, you have to think of water that not only percolates down or seeps down, but it escapes evapotranspiration, it escapes the roots of plants, it gets beyond all of those factors and actually makes it below that zone. So in this area, very low, 0 to 2, okay, along here. The green area, slightly higher elevations, different soils. In this area, we're 0 to 10. And these confounded geologists always, why do they have these ranges, 0 to 10? I look right around in this area, but I can tell you that the values in this report, the high values were up north of the Caloosahatchee and to the far east of Lee County. So they just lumped it into a big category, but by far, the higher values approaching that 10 are way up high and over here to the east. And then we look at the area here that basically where the mine is located, and it is 0 to 3 inches per year. Okay, is what's come up with this. However, that's just that large area, and they've included all of that data together to do that. The value generated by this report at the nearest monitor well was 1.8 inches. Okay, actually makes it into the top of the water table. So we get an average of 54 inches of rain per year. 1.8 actually makes it in. How on earth did they come up with that? Chloride concentrations. Rainfall has a chloride concentration of about 1 part per million. It gets that, seawater evaporates, you pick up a little bit of chloride. They monitored as part of this study water quality and rain gauges. All right, so they get a good idea of what is the background value, okay? And then based on that and some real specific mathematics looking at isotopes of oxygen and hydrogen and everything else, they've come up with recharge rates. So we've got 54 inches of rain on average falling on the ground based on this report and very detailed studies on chloride and other isotopes. About 1.8 inches actually escapes the root zone, escapes the evaporative zone, and actually makes it down. Then here's our Bonita Springs Marl. Okay, so we have our water table, lower Tamiami. So some aspect gets through this. I'm not here to say that it is a lead shield, but it's certainly less than 1.8 inches. And if I was to venture a guess, that's why I have a question mark here, I would say it's less than an inch. Actually gets to the lower Tamiami. And now, remember that water level plot that was so confusing with the 3 lines and the 1 water level for the sandstone aquifer that was higher? That shows us that water actually has the potential to recharge the lower Tamiami from below as well. So these layer cakes, it's complex. And you can see that in those high chloride values. We had a high chloride value in the lower Tamiami that was higher than the water table. Most likely it's coming from below. Okay, and that brings up, you guys have talked a lot about saltwater intrusion. There's basically 2 types, generally, of saltwater intrusion. Lateral, from the coast, and there are some places in Florida that have definitely experienced that. Up in Tampa Bay, where I do most of my work, okay, in Bradenton and south of Tampa, it's 1,000 feet below the surface, but there is a slow, very slow encroachment laterally of saltwater. What is more often where it happened? It's called upconing, where wells are perched in areas like this, okay, and they're pumping, and they induce recharge, and you've heard that, up into that unit. And when they induce that recharge, they pull that high chloride water, which is more dense, up into that unit. This is more common. The inducement or upconing is much more common in coastal cities and public supply wells. City of Venice has it, City of Sarasota, Sarasota County. We work with them in all their well field management plans to try to play those piano keys in different ways so that we don't induce too much salt water vertically. Water levels. You've heard a lot about water levels. This is a hydrograph long-term from 1979 through 2014. One of the wells that I showed before. And if you look at it, got a lot of, a lot of zigzags, obviously. That's the wet and dry season. But generally, if you look over time, and that's right there from 1979 to present, we don't see a dramatic decreasing, significant trend in water level. We obviously, you can see that sometimes we're much wetter in certain years, so the values are a little bit higher, but overall, everything is pretty much, at least in proximity to this property, rocking along pretty stable. So what have you learned today? I've done my best. Bonita Springs Marl is left intact by mining. I've showed you where that occurs on the property and how the mining can occur at different depths. The USGS, as part of this report and other reports, has calculated, not with models, using physical parameters, okay, that the recharge to the water table is low in this area, and approximately 1.8 inches per year. And again, that's at the very top of this rock column. Groundwater and chlorides in the water table in the lower Tamiami are different. I showed you those values. So the Bonita Springs Marl acts as a confining unit, separating those strata, separating the water quality as well as the water levels. And groundwater levels in the water table in the Tamiami aquifer, I've showed you several hydrographs today. Proximate to the site appear stable, and they have fluctuations that are based on seasonal and hydrologic conditions, more rainfall versus less rainfall. And with that, I will answer any questions.
Question. It seems like what you're saying about this groundwater recharge is significantly different than what we heard last week from Greg Rawl and is in the other reports. How do you...
I've watched you have Mizzimer, I think, you've got some values that are
Yep.
from Mizzimer.
No, we don't.
And we have Mizzimer and we have Greg Rawl of sorts, okay? And I think I'm down here at the low rate. How is the difference? A lot of Greg Rawls, what I looked at online and what he presented were model-generated values, okay? They were mathematically calculated. I told you I'm an old-school geologist. I like looking at physical parameters. I like looking comprehensively at what they are. And I really abide by a lot of the work that's done by the GS and the Water Management District. Okay, this is a long-term study to looking at it. So there are differences. And why are models, why do they generate such funny models? We have 4 modelers in my office. I've run thousands of groundwater flow models. The assumptions under models, and you got to remember this, is I showed you all those end members that make up the Tamiami, all those complex facies and oysters and sand and clay. How can you possibly put all that into a model? How can you look at that variability? You can't. You must assign a single permeability or a couple of permeabilities. You're limited by the thickness and permeabilities and various values that you put into the model. Do you have enough data to actually look at that? This report was based on 40 independent data collection points, one of which was right by the mine. And so I think Greg was also talking about larger area, and if you remember, I think he said the average over the DRGR was about a little over 3 inches. I'm at 1.8, right? So I don't think, if you look back through his stuff and look at the average and some of the values that made up, and again, I'm looking at site-specific, I don't think that we're in conflict, but I abide by what the water quality tells me and what the water levels tell me. Those are key factors, and we use those values. If you're a good modeler, you use those values to make your models better. And so you look at that variability and you use that. And again, I just went to the raw data. That's where I like to reside.
I have a really probably really dumb question. But I always, I guess because of the way it's illustrated, saw the aquifers as being sort of underground rivers. But obviously, if you're pulling the limestone out of it, then these are water molecules in the rock. I mean, in and around.
That's a really common misperception. I do a lot of diving and was going to be a certified cave diver. If you want to find an underground river, you've got to get to these karstic formations in North Florida where there's these huge solution features and pathways. Mm-hmm. Mainly in Florida, we're composed of sedimentary rocks. It's mainly sediments. Some of those sediments, clays, are very impermeable, but there's no underground river.
Okay.
It's flowing through sediments, through rock, through clays, through sand.
So if we're talking about a horizontal flow of water that's heading southwest, all right, when the water, you pull out the rock and there's a bunch of water, 60 feet deep, let's just say in one part, all right, and it's pushing sideways. It's basically some of it in that aquifer is going below the berm. It's still traveling underground.
Now you're talking about a different gradient and lateral movement of groundwater. This area, and again, try not to use too many technical terms. If you look at the potentiometric surface, contours of the water levels, it's relatively flat. So those travel times are really very slow.
Okay.
There's not a lot of lateral movement. All right, and that's why lateral saltwater intrusion is also a very slow process. It's like a wedge. It very slowly moves in. Obviously, you can do things to try to speed that up if you can, but no, it's generally very slow.
The other thing that I want to make sure I was right about, that I understood from my tour of the mine, was that, for example, a lot of the heavy equipment you use is electric. It's not gas operated or anything. So really, and there's no chemicals used within the process. So it would only be what falls off the truck, so to speak, the leaky piece of oil, a little bit of, I mean, it's just the trucks that are coming in to take it out are the only addition to pollutants that the process is creating on that property. Just be the truck.
Absolutely. Most mining operations, okay, Florida is highly regulated in a lot of ways. Similarly mined like you're talking about. Electric drag lines and other equipment. You're not going to see, pools of oil and fuel and everything else. And I've not monitored this pit, but I've monitored a lot of limestone pits, a lot of them. And they all have had excellent water quality. It's basically a window into the water table is all that's being created. And so it's really the ambient water quality is what is in the pit.
What about the blasting components and what is used for the blasting? Any chemicals?
Such a small amount. I mean, there is some blasting that goes on, but it's a small amount in comparison to the volumetric large area of water that we have. And literally that is almost disintegrated. I'm not a blasting expert. I have been involved in some blasting operations, but basically it's disintegrated upon the blast. So there may be some minute component that's left over. And I'm saying extremely minute because it's disintegrated, okay, as part of the blasting operation. But I have never seen in monitoring of dozens of limestone quarries have I seen any component of blasting material. So, and I think it's just not a concern.
Dave, you mentioned potentiometrics, I think is what you called it, about the site. And I assume once you mine and you create 80-foot depth water, that's going to change the potentiometrics so that it's pushing down
No, it
on
really
the
just
marl?
matches what's around it. Okay, when you mine and you excavate a hole, it just matches. Dig a hole in your backyard. Water will infill and basically match. Water wants to level out, so it's going to meet whatever the water table is around it.
Right, but you talked laterally. It's probably not much movement.
Not
but
much, extremely flat.
Right, I'm talking more along the lines of what's going through the leakage, whatever, through the marl, and it happens maybe so minutely, but wouldn't that by stacking 80 feet of water as opposed to keeping 80 feet of rock change that, or no?
No.
Okay.
You've not at all. You've unloaded things by taking the rock off, but I mean you've got 80 feet of water right now, and so it's really there was still 80 feet of saturated sediment before you mine, so it has virtually no effect on what happens in regards to that.
So it would only change it if you were to empty the water out.
Now, if we pulled it, I think you'd have a very hard time doing that, but if you pulled all that water out of there, if you were constantly dewatering it, I mean, to 80 feet, you would build what's called a cone of depression, okay? And that would extend out. Eventually, it would hit the water table, but you would have to pump out all of that water that would be rushing towards that withdrawal.
Okay.
So that's why dewatering a limestone pit is virtually impossible to do. Okay, it can be done in certain areas. In North Georgia, I've been at some that were dewatered to 200 feet. Okay, the limestone was about as permeable as wood. Okay, so that you could excavate it and you could get that out of there and they dewatered it. That's not the case in Florida.
Excellent. Anyone else?
Yeah, I have a question.
Thank you.
Oh man, this guy, he nails it.
Can I ask a
Please.
Can you go back a few slides?
It's your expert. You're
I'm
paying
gonna
for it,
try.
right?
This is very irregular.
I'm gonna try.
I told you I had a hard time getting all this.
That one? He loves that one.
I had a hard time with this. I kept looking, going, Dave, what the heck is it saying up and down?
George, can we get you on the mic?
Well, I'll come back once I ask if I'm doing it. So I told you it took me so many times. It finally clicked in this time.
Okay.
So click to the one that had the green bar. And Tori, the light went off. Again, I tell you, I'm very dense. I thought like you did for the longest time, that there's like this water that's flowing down, and when the well hits it, it hits this water. If you got down, you could swim around and do whatever. You know, obviously, it's wrong. There's all these little, this is aggregate, all these little stones and rocks and all that. So the water is going through this rock at 1 inch per 10 years, or I mean, how long? How long does it take to move through all this?
Depends on the grade. I don't know the exact gradient here, but it's very slow.
Very
The water,
slow.
it's relatively flat. Remember, there has to be a differential to drive water, and it's relatively flat.
So when you were showing that other chart that had the different water levels,
Yeah.
this is taken here. Imagine again, I don't want to mark on the screen, but all those dots would represent aggregate. And the level of water within that aggregate here, you were measuring, is okay, in the wet season, it may go up here, such that there's a gap between the bottom of the marl and the top of the water table, theoretically. And then the dry season, you know, the water within all that aggregate comes down this way. So that, is that correct or wrong?
Somewhat correct, but
And Dave, you might want to
Okay.
repeat George's question, just so we
Okay.
can put it on the record.
What George, and this is what a lot of people, it is difficult to understand some of these concepts, all right? Water levels in here, okay, were oscillating. A well that was open specifically to this unit, okay, the water levels were oscillating. One here, they were oscillating. But if you look at the elevations, the water level in this one was actually above this. It was up here oscillating, okay, down below, and the one here was slightly above that. So don't think of the water level as being that oscillation as occurring almost, you know, within this unit, okay? So this is where it gets, the geology's simple, it's like layer cakes, but when you superimpose water on top of it, things start getting harder, okay? So think of this is totally saturated right now. It is completely saturated.
And how thick? Because when you're saying it's a change of water level from 8 to 12 feet, you're not saying from the top of that green line, 8 feet high.
Remember, right here, this could be 106 feet.
Right.
Remember from my graphic, 106 feet, okay? And we had an oscillation of about 5 or 6 feet.
Right, went
So
from
if I
7 to
was if I
14,
was-
I think.
Right, so if I was to draw this to scale, and man, I'm having a hard time with this thing.
David, the water, it still moves within the height and depth of the.
Correct.
It's still, the level moves within the height and depth of the marl. It doesn't pop up through the marl and have a higher elevation if they're on.
Right, no, and I guess what I'm trying to put on the record too is it's not, you're not measuring from the bottom of the marl because that changes. You're measuring from a static point, but
Correct.
I'll let you put that on the record. You're the geologist.
Well, here, so if I was to put this to scale, okay, remember this is 100, from 45 feet to 106 feet. If I plotted that oscillation, it would be like a little squiggly line way up here at the top, okay? Really close to land surface. That oscillation is coming up, you know, with the wet season, the water table is very close, maybe 2 or 3 feet of land surface. Sometimes it intersects land surface. Okay, so that oscillation is occurring very near land surface, okay, as part of that. And it's hard to understand when you get into these multiple layers. This one also has a water level, okay, associated with that. And I don't want to confuse people, but this water level, because of this confines it, is actually oscillating up here, okay, in elevation. If I was just looking at the elevation, okay, it is oscillating up here in this location, in elevation slightly above the water table. So when you get, these are complex concepts that the water can be higher than the unit itself. If you go drill a well, let's say, and you pierce a confining unit and the well flows out on the ground, if I drill deep enough here, if I went 500 feet below land surface right here, that well would flow from artesian. My well was 500 feet deep, but the water level is 10 feet above land surface. Okay, so it's well above the clays that are confining it way at depth. It's just it is being compressed to that point, and that's the potentiometric surface. At what level does it have the potential to float, you know, what elevation does it rise to? That can be higher than the confining unit that confines that. That's why it's called artesian. All right? So I know those are hard for people to sometimes grasp when you talk about these layers and confining units. They make things difficult. And look at the Hawthorne group, the sandstone, you got the mid-Hawthorne, you've got multiple layers here. And so believe me, it just gets more complex as you go down. But I hope, George, I don't want to, those are hard concepts for sure. But generally the take-home message is, at least that I'm trying to present today, is water levels are relatively stable. We're not mining up the marl. and there is a low recharge rate. What do most geoscientists think is a high recharge rate? Greater than 10 inches per year. Right, so we're well below that value.
Good, thank you.
Thank you.
I'm not going to be anywhere nearly as detailed as that. And in fact, I'm going to try and be a little bit more common in terms of some of the conversations that we're talking about. At any rate, for the record, David Depew. And let me start out by answering a couple specific questions. The way I've tried to perceive this concept of the water and the rock is not as if we're taking something out and the water's flowing in. The water's there. Picture a bucket that's got a giant sponge in it, and it's full of water. If you take the sponge out and squeeze it so that all the water goes out of the sponge, the water's still in the bucket, you're taking the sponge out. Lime rock is the sponge. The water's in the bucket, and the water's in the ground. When you're removing the lime rock, you're taking out the sponge. You're not taking out the water, you're only taking out the sponge. All the rest of the water's going back into the ground. In terms of potentiometric issues, the way you find difficulties in some of the mines is if there's a strong topographic fall across the mine. If you've got a property that has one end of the mine at elevation 20 and another end of the mine at elevation 2, you've got an 18-foot fall across that mine. If you dig out that particular piece of property, the water level goes to whatever the lowest level of confinement is of the mine. When I say confinement, I don't mean a confining layer, I mean the confinement of the lake that you've created as the mine. That can have an impact off-site of the mine because it will draw water in and draw it to the level of whatever the mine lake is. So that's another thing you have to be aware of when you look at these things. Happily, this particular mine has got very little fall. As Dave Brown had mentioned to you, the topography is very flat in this particular area, so it doesn't have a huge off-site impact. The other question that I did want to address is the blasting. This is not like the Lake District over on the East Coast. They're not using benzene in any of the blasting materials. And that's, to my knowledge, they haven't ever used any sort of benzene or any of those materials. Without saying whether that issue with regard to the lake belt is right or wrong, the mine operators claim they never have used benzene over there either. But the water quality guy said, well, we've detected benzene issues in the water tests. I won't get into that, but these guys have not been using that sort of blasting. It's just not the same kind of operation that they're doing over on the East Coast. So there's no reason to think that there's any sort of chemicals that are going into this water situation that are anything like what you see in the lake belt. Mr. Gallagher asked a bunch of questions. We got the sheet of paper with all those questions. So one of the things I'm going to try and do is try to give you a planner's perspective, which is to say I'm not going to talk about potentiometric surfaces and all the other stuff in an attempt to answer some of these questions. Some of them have already been addressed, but I'm going to try and specifically tell you with regard to those questions that we got from last couple times that you guys met. The first was, what is the mine legally required to do to the mine area when it finishes mining? And the answer is the banks have to be sloped in accordance with the permit, and there are 4-to-1 and 6-to-1 and 2-to-1 slopes, which you can see in the cross-section that Bill talked a little bit about over here. And there are littoral plantings that have to be done along portions of the banks of the lake area. The berm will remain around the lake at this point under the mine permit, and as Bill also told you, there is no off-site discharge. Water quality and water quantity don't have an impact off-site because there is no off-site discharge with this mine lake. If you want to talk about water going through laterally, the water table aquifer, certainly there is water that goes through there. There's water that goes through there now. There's water that will continue to go through laterally as water moves. As Dave Brown, I think, told you, that water movement is fairly slow. So the banks have to be sloped, and there are some limited littoral plantings that have to be installed. Water quality in the lakes. The sediment is going to drop out of there. This is what a mine lake looks like, and unfortunately it's kind of a dark photo, but that's typically what a mine lake looks like after the mining is done. In this particular photo, and you don't get to see it very well, but there are some shallow areas here, and along the edges, and there are some much deeper areas interior to this part of the lake. What happens is that we anticipate it will be normal water quality for deep lakes. Now, deep lakes have a very different kind of characteristics than your typical South Florida lakes. You get into water columns that are 80 and 90 feet deep, and you have a very different type of water at the bottom than you do at the top. Through the first 12 to 18 feet or so, and the guys who do this are called limnologists. There's a little piece of trivia for you. Limnologist, I'll spell that for the record, Limnologist. Limnologists say that what happens is you have an aerobic portion of the lake on the top and an anaerobic portion on the bottom. And it they simply talk about levels of dissolved oxygen in the lake levels. And that's how they determine water quality in these leftover mine lakes, is the dissolved oxygen. In the top 12 to 18 feet, it's normal dissolved oxygen levels. Fish will thrive, plants can thrive if they have something to grow in. Just as an example, you can see some of the shallower areas do have sort of a green cast that just didn't show up well on this projection, but you can clearly see it when you go out there and pull the Google Earth image up. This is one of the Alico mine lakes, by the way. This is Alico up to the north. Florida Gulf Coast University is down over here. And I chose it simply because I'm familiar with the lake. I've been out to the lake, and I know that the bank has been reclaimed on this particular lake in accordance with the ERP permit. That's what it would look like. There's been, on this particular lake, there's a flowway that goes along this southeast corner, a little bit like the mine lake out there at the Bonita Grand Mine. And what happens is the central part of the lake is fairly deep, and you have this typical aerobic and anaerobic set of water bodies in there. Generally, the two don't mix, especially in Florida. They don't mix. They don't have inversions in these water columns like they do in the northern states. And as a result, the water quality in the first 12 to 18 feet is typical water quality for any naturally occurring lake. And as I said, fish thrive in it, plants thrive in it. It's just normal water quality. And like I said, there's no chemicals that go into it from this operation. But as Dave Brown noted, it takes a while for the sediment to settle. So that kind of milky color exists in these lakes for quite some time. And if, again, you go out onto Google Earth, you can see some of the lakes in Lee County that have active mining operations, and you get that very turquoisey color as opposed to these darker ones where the mining activity's finished. We don't anticipate any extraordinary conditions in these lakes. When do the permits expire? There's a lot of permits on this thing. There are lots of permits. We've got pages of permits when we list them out. And for purposes of the city of Bonita Springs, the permits expires on May 27th of 2020. They were originally permitted through 2018. The governor declared a variety of different emergencies for the state of Florida. That automatically extends permits. The mine applied for those extensions of permits through the city. Those were approved. The city had no option. They had to approve them. That's how that works, and currently the extension goes through May 27th of 2020. When does mining stop? Again, May 27th, 2020 is the final day according to the city of Bonita Springs. I can't give you an exact date because I don't know whether there's going to be more emergencies declared between now and May 27th of 2020. I would tell you there's a good chance you're going to get some more emergencies. And every time the governor declares them under the current administrative code, you get an extra 6 months. So that's generally what can happen.
And David, real quick on the permit, is that when active mining stops, or is that when all your reclamation has to be done?
That is when active mining stops.
Got it.
Then reclamation comes after that.
Okay.
But I will tell you, if we know a date when mining is going to stop, that also means cash flow is going to stop. Most of the reclamation is going to be done as long as there's still cash flow. That is just the natural order of things. That's what's going to happen. There may be some leftovers still to do, but that reclamation is going to get done pretty much while there's cash to finance it. Does the city have any other agreement with the mine? Yes, it does. There is an annexation agreement that was done with the mine in 2003. January of 2003, Lee County approved the depth, the final depth, and basically the current operating parameters of the mine. February of 2003 is when the annexation occurred, and as part of the annexation agreement, there were certain things that the city agreed to assist the mine with. One of the things was simply with regard to comprehensive plan amendments. The threat, if you will, was that the mine reserve the right to de-annex. Now, having said that, some of you may know, because it's been brought up before, de-annexation is a bit of a problem because de-annexation creates an enclave. So there's a problem there. On the other hand, the mine has been attempting to work on a comp plan amendment as well. I guess that doesn't come as a particular surprise either. At any rate, insofar as permits are also agreements, the mine has a number of agreements with the city vis-a-vis permits. And there are, again, like I said, there's pages and pages of permits on this mine. Some of them are with the city of Bonita Springs, and they go through the design of the mine lakes, the way the reclamation is going to be done, and some of the preservation requirements, things like that. So insofar as those can be viewed as agreements, those are also agreements, and you just have to look at each of the individual approvals from the city, from the county, which the city inherited, and then you've got the environmental resource permit and some of the other mining approvals that are, in essence, agreements as well. We can talk about those in individual detail, but in terms of specific agreements, the annexation agreement is really the big one. The balance of it is contained, the balance of the other agreements are contained in the various permit documents. What does the basic mine permit say about water quality? Well, it just requires all water to be retained on site. There are no off-site water quality or water quantity impacts that are currently allowed. And this isn't just the city permit, this is the broad universe of permits that apply to this mine. And what it says is that you keep it on the mine property. Now, there are also well field protection criteria. There are no potable water wells proximate to this mine. They're quite a distance away. And based on the slowness by which water travels laterally through the aquifer, we're well outside any of the circles that they draw around the mines, or the wells. And they draw them in like 6-month, 1-year, 5-year, and 10-year travel times. We're well outside any of these various travel times. So from a quality standpoint through the subsurface water, we're also outside of any of these criteria that are currently established by either the city or the county or any of the various utility companies. Does the mine have to remove the berm around the outside of the mine before they leave? Currently, it is not required. The way the current permit says is that it stays in place. So what that means is when they're done, there's still not going to be any off-site impacts for the mine. Now, it's kind of easy for the mine to do this because if you look at the topography in this area, they're at a high spot. They're kind of up on top. So it's not like there's a lot of water that flows into the mine property. Their topography is such that they're up here and everything else is kind of down below them, especially to the east and to the south of the mine. Does the berm protect the outside environment from mine waste products? Yes. But as I indicated, mine waste products are sediment, not some sort of hazardous substances. They're not using any sort of hazardous substances in there, other than, as you point out, I mean, there are trucks that are out on the mine. They have gasoline or diesel or, lubrication, that sort of stuff. So you'll get some of that like you will with any kind of operation. I'd point out that you get that for any farming operation. and you're getting less of the kinds of materials that you'll find at a farming operation in terms of herbicides, pesticides, fertilizers than on a mine of this sort of type would produce. Some of the lakes are 85 feet deep. They come close to the Bonita Marl. Yes, you've had a lot of talk about the Bonita Marl. I'm not going to get into all that. It's a gooey green clay-like substance. Nobody wants it in their rock. If it gets into the rock, it's very expensive to wash it off the rock. So they're not really interested in doing it. Does the mine have a drawing, or does the city have a drawing of what the mine property would look like? Yes, this is it. Now, this is superimposed above an aerial photograph. They have it also without the aerial photograph, but I put it on the aerial here because I thought it was a little bit better to see it. And what this shows is when the mine is complete, we've got a lake here, we've got a lake here, we've got a lake here, we've got a lake here that kind of wraps around all of this stuff. We've got a lake here. So the rest of this is going to get filled in. We've got the on-site preserves that Craig talked about. We've got the easterly preserve. North is to the left on this one, by the way. And the crew land is out here. Over here on the bottom ultimately goes over to Citrus Park and all of that. And this is Bonita Grand Road that comes down to the southwest corner of the mine. So, I mean, that's what it's going to look like when it gets done. And as Bill said earlier, what's going to happen is you're going to have about 402 acres of lakes when it gets done, 384 preserve, and includes the area to the east as well as these on-site chunks that are shown in the crosshatch. And then you're going to have about 475 acres of developable uplands. Now, just because they're developable doesn't mean that they're usable. For example, this little piece right in here is pretty thin. So there's not going to be really much that you're going to get into some of these really thin areas. So the 475 acres of developable uplands is a little bit of a misnomer. It also includes a 200-foot wide reservation, which is this dotted line along here, that was required back when, and you heard Dave Loveland talking about the 951 extension. Back when this thing went through the process in the early 2000s, that was still a potential. That particular set-aside was required as part of the zoning. It's still there. If the 951 extension doesn't go through, it's still there. It's a 200-foot set-aside that was required as part of the zoning. So some of this 475 acres of developable uplands simply, it's not really there. We figured that we're going to have somewhere north of 400, but well short of the 475 as potential developable uplands once we get done. We actually think it's going to be pretty nice. I'm going to come back up here in just a second and show you why we think it's going to be pretty nice. But I think George wants to come back and just talk for a couple minutes in terms of summary, and then I'll jump back up and show you why I think it's going to be pretty nice.
Can I ask
Unless
you a
you've got
couple
questions for me.
questions
Yeah,
before
sure.
Okay. One of the word de-annexation, I'm not familiar with.
De-annexation just means to take it back out of the city and
Right.
put it into the
But
county.
there are quite a few properties that annexed in after the mine because of.
That's why we got a problem. Because we
Yeah.
create enclaves of
Right.
those properties that were annexed in later that are contiguous only because of the mine.
Right.
And so that's why de-annexation, even though that's shown in the annexation agreement, is probably not a rational option for the mine folks. I think, in other words, that we're married no matter what. The reason we went in the first place is because all the infrastructure comes from the city. The mine access goes through the city. The city was in the process clearly of creating itself during that period of time, and the mine folks recognized that they were inextricably tied to the city no matter what, and so it was put into the annexation agreement that de-annexation could be a potential, but as I said, I think we're married no matter what. It's not a rational option at this point.
Good. Because I came in because you guys came in. And the other thing, I just want to understand, because the berm would stay intact, and therefore, whatever were to happen, whether, let's just say there was development at the allowable rate right now with no increase in density,
Mm-hmm.
or if there was an increase in density, or if it was used for another purpose. Because of that berm and because of South Florida Water Management's permitting, then what happened within that property would stay within that property. In other words, is it my understanding that there would not be an increase in flooding or
Correct, the way it's configured now.
because it's already
Correct.
confined?
Now,
So that makes it quite unique to some of these other properties.
yes,
is
it
that
does.
true? Okay.
It is. It is a unique piece of property. That's kind of what we've been saying all along. Now, could that change? Well, yes, it could change. I mean, you could go back to the Water Management District and rejigger everything, and it's conceivable. It's theoretically possible. The problem with it is that it involves creating, because as I said, the topography out here is such that the mine area is kind of at the top of the hill. So you're going to have to reconfigure, you're going to have to redo the topography, which is going to be a pretty expensive deal.
Under what circumstances
Well,
would
the
you have
water, if I can use the map behind you, the water generally is coming from this area and even further up. And it comes down, there's a branch that goes down over here through Edison Farms and kind of stacks up in this area until it overflows down here and goes through Spring Creek, and it goes under through the development that's in here and everything. There's another branch that comes down here, and it rolls down here and ultimately comes through Kiel and Imperial and all that sort of stuff. But this is a higher area, so what happens even in its native state is we've got a little area along this easterly edge, but the water kind of split, and it went over this way and it went over this way. So you could conceivably use this for something, but you'd have to scrape down all the rest of this in order to capture it.
Right.
So what I'm saying is it's not that it's not theoretically possible, but it's going to take some engineering, and that may not be the cheapest option in the world to do. But is it possible to get rid of that berm and do something over there? Yeah, it's possible. The difficulty is our calculations are that even if we raise something on the order of 4 or 5 feet, this whole area as storage in some way, we only add about an inch of water through the Flint Penn Strand. That's how much you're raising. We're only going to be able to, at maximum 4 or 5 feet of increased freeboard in there, we're only going to store about an extra 500 million gallons in there. And that's just, I know it sounds like a lot, but it's not very much when you're talking about an area that's as big as that whole Imperial River watershed. It just doesn't do much for it. So it's a lot of, you scrape it down and then build it back up sort of and redirect water, but it doesn't get you much.
But the mine does provide an opportunity as one of the largest properties in the Bonita DRGR. It does provide, I think, a unique opportunity, an impacted site to be part of
Oh,
the
yeah.
solution puzzle. And
Absolutely.
so I think that it really does provide, some opportunities.
There are great opportunities here for it. In fact, and I can show you some other locations where this has happened. I understand that Bonita Springs Utilities does not take water from the water table aquifer at this point for potable, but Lee County Utilities does. And on all of the mines that we worked on up in the Corkscrew area, we've stacked water wells all the way around those mines, and those mines have acted as reservoirs for potable water wells. And we can, I think I've got a couple slides later that I'll show you where I can point a couple of them out. But what we've done is put paired water wells around these mines that go both into the lower Tamiami and the upper Tamiami, and we're pulling out potable water from using these things as reservoirs for potable
But
water.
is there development around those mines?
Mm-hmm.
So there's development around it, and yet you're still storing,
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah, yeah.
Interesting, okay.
Now, you have to use best management practices to make sure you're not dumping a lot of crap into the mine lake. But, I mean, that's just a matter of getting a good homeowner association, you know, limiting fertilizer application and pesticide application, and, you know, working the BMPs as best as you can. But, yeah, it's quite effective, and Lee County Utilities has been very aggressive at getting easements and donations of these properties for their water harvesting.
David, I don't mean to put you on the spot, but I'm sure you've all had discussions about best case scenario at the end of the mining operation, what you envision there, as far as on that 400 or so acres of developable property. What are those, if you're comfortable sharing?
Well,
what are those discussions?
and I'm getting a little into what George was talking about, or going to finish up with, but what we did on the mine plan amendment was try and look at what the city already had in its comprehensive plan. And what that was the urban fringe category. Now, frankly, the urban fringe category has pretty high density for what we had anticipated for this property. And when you start doing the calculations, you were up around 3,000 units. Well, we looked at it and said, under no circumstances could we ever get more than about 2,900. I think it was 2,902 was the number on this mine, and that's crazy density. We don't think it's ever going to develop at that level, but that was what we had to work with without going in and doing kind of a full-scale modification to the comprehensive plan. So that's what we applied for, but we kind of let it be known that we're going to try and do a rezoning as well, so the ultimate number was going to come way down from that, and I don't think there was any realistic anticipation that that was going to be what number ultimately evolved out of this. If we get, I would say, something on the order of 3 or 3.5 units to the acre on the upland 400 plus acres, that's probably about as much as you could ever really anticipate for in there. As far as the balance of the DRGR, that's not my little red wagon. I don't have, those guys aren't clients. I haven't looked at any of that stuff, haven't studied any of it. The mine can comfortably fit something like that on it. More than that, and you're looking at stacking stuff up there, which is not really the kind of landform that's out there.
But 12 to 1,500 would be a safe
That's probably a
target,
good
and
somewhere
then
in there.
that's economically feasible.
It does work, and what happens is, and that's one thing George wants to tell you about, is what happens economically when you look at that, what it generates.
It's a good segue then.
Question.
Yeah.
If the mine was to be permitted to, whoever buys it, to do what you're talking about, wouldn't that, there's no way that Edison Farm's not going to want to come in the city because they're going to want the same thing.
Yeah, that's going to be another real issue. I don't know what's going to happen with Edison Farms. They've been wrapped up in litigation. I know because I've been part of it. If there's litigation that's really nasty, I usually get called as a witness in one form or another. It's just kind of what I do. We had bankruptcy actions that we were involved in. We had all sorts of just an absolute train wreck with Edison Farms. What ultimately is going to take place out there, I don't know. It's property that at least the vast majority of it probably needs to be under public ownership. Where anybody's going to get the money to do that, I don't know at this point. I did have a scheme a number of years ago where I had about 4 sections which I could have gotten into public ownership, but that didn't work. So at any rate, I don't know what's going to happen with that. I haven't had any contact with the foreclosure agency, which was Egon Capital, AEGON for the record, for the minutes. So I don't know how that's going to evolve. I do know there have been a number of folks who have attempted to purchase it and use it as mitigation for other types of development. And I think if Lee County ever gets any kind of TDR, transferable development right program working, that's probably the best effort that'll happen for it. But right now, it's such a mess. I can't imagine that there's any real resolution that I could sit down and tell you what will happen with it. I doubt that you're looking at any real development opportunities for that property, though. if nothing else, it's at the bottom end, and you can really see it on these larger maps. It's at the bottom end of the plumbing. This is where water stacks up. It gets down to I-75. There aren't enough culverts and paths for it to get through I-75, so it backs up on that Edison Farms property. And there's just almost no opportunity at this point to relieve that. So it's going to continue to be, in essence, an area where that water backs up. There's no other place for it to go. So.
We're jumping around up and down here. Just a couple of divergent things first. Mr. Forbes, you brought up that the other study said this about water recharge, and Dave Brown says that. And at one point, I don't know when or how, but even early on, I suggested, let's get these people in a room, maybe not this room because of the formality. We'll get Dave, we'll get Mr. Rawls, we'll get whoever the heck else you want, sit in a room, let them talk about it. And if we're wrong, I would like to know where we've misjudged things. If somebody else said, yeah, it's a math model. So you all, I mean, I'm trying to put myself in your shoes and understand this thing, and as you know, I'm having trouble with it as well. So I think to continue this, he said that and she said that, let's get these people in a room and figure out if they disagree, fine, they disagree, but at least you'll know this is where these conclusions are coming from, the methodologies, and you can, judge accordingly. Because I know you must be as frustrated as everyone else that you get all these people come up here and fairly divergent opinions, it appears, on some things. So that's one thing. Just quickly on what David said, he said 12 to 1,500 units. I don't know what the right density is. I really don't. It's not 2,900 units. As David said, that went in under the zoning category. We have not done any land planning because I don't know what to plan for. If I had to make a wild guess, I would say, a 2,000 number, 15 to maybe 2,000 might be more realistic, but I don't know until we start doing some planning. We would not be anticipating high density here, though. Single family, you see what's being successful in the market, different levels of single family, perhaps some flat over flats. But because so much of this land is going to be filled, you're not going to want to go up 4 or 5 stories, even if the market wanted it, because it's just the cost to drill down, because the soil isn't going to handle that kind of weight. So I can only represent here on the density side that it's not 29, but I don't want that 12 to 1,500 stick in your head either until we do some math, do some planning. We also need to know what the stipulations are going to be. It's hard to know what's economical and what's not until we know everything that's going to be imposed on any additional development. I wanted to just share with you, again, you can tell I'm the lay guy here, and I'm trying to find the right mind. As I said, I'm trying to put myself in your shoes. So what are the opportunities? What can we do? And I'm again, from 31,000 feet, I'm the 4th grader trying to understand what are the takeaways here. And I'll just share with you my takeaways, whether they're yours or not. But when I try to just say very simply what's going on here, you've heard a lot of this. Number one, we don't contribute to water quantity issues, and we don't contribute to water quality issues because no water leaves the site. There's a berm all the way around, surface water, that is, obviously, because there's a berm all the way around the property. So no water's leaving. So we're not contributing to any flooding issues or any water quality issues. We've already talked about this marl extensively. If it ever got in our equipment, it would be probably ruin the equipment. So we do everything we do to stay away. Have you heard enough about that? The marl is a confining unit that separates these two things. So what are we going to do when the mining's done? The concept of a reservoir has been brought up a number of times. We're going to meet with Mr. Kopp actually afterwards to understand a little more what his thoughts were and see where maybe we have or have not missed the boat on this. But when I look at it, it's very difficult for me to understand the cost-benefit analysis of a reservoir here. First of all, residential and reservoir uses are incompatible. So we can't have a residential community of any size and also have a reservoir. One, I'm told South Florida Water will not allow that. Second of all, you're going to have land that's going to be, lakes that are going to be high when it's filled and drain down when it's dry. You're going to have some exceedingly ugly lake banks, frankly, at certain times of the year, and then other times it's up. That's not exactly conducive to high-quality residential development on lakes. So somebody's got to buy the land, and the land's not cheap. Then you have the fill cost. You got to raise this site. And to raise it to the levels that I believe are being proposed, I don't know the number, but I know the relative number to what we've talked about just to bring it to the nominal site to put houses. And it's extraordinarily expensive. To go beyond that, you know, I don't want to throw around a lot of numbers, but just to fill this site at a normal development would be anywhere from 10 to 15 million bucks. I think preliminarily we've kicked around. Again, haven't done a land plan, we haven't done specific. So you start raising up past that, it's obviously going to be more. Then to create the swimming pool, to not have water percolate out horizontally, you're going to basically create a pool. You're going to have to build, if I understand correctly, these vertical slurry walls from 40 feet to 90 feet to ensure that you have capacity. Well, God only knows what that'll cost. I mean, that's got to be, around all these lakes, absolutely exorbitant. Then Mr. Gilkey brought up last time, how do we get the water into this thing? Well, we're going to have to pump the water up. So now you have the cost of the pumps, and the cost of pumping, and the cost of maintaining those pumps. Finally, may not be the largest issue up there, but you're going to have wetland degradation. All those little areas that Craig pointed to, the cypress heads that are sort of floating in the lakes, they're gone. Because when the reservoir comes up to store water, it's going to flood those areas. When it comes down, it's going to dry them out. And as near as I know, Craig tells me there's not a heck of a lot in the way of plants that will grow in mud banks when it's dry, and then when the water's 5 feet above it when it's all wet. So all those reserve wetland areas within the lake, the preserve areas to the east, of course, that's maintained. But all those little pockets, they're basically gone. And for what benefit? This is, and Dave may need to help this a little bit here, but essentially this is the swimming pool idea where we dig these, we put in the berms, the water's coming down, it's going this way, it's going that way, a little bit down here. So we're going to have to come down and basically, I call it creating a swimming pool, I don't know how else to say it, to keep that water in there. Berms are constructed. We've kind of gone through all this stuff up here. Very little movement is happening. And all this cost, all this work, all this stuff's going to be done. And I'm not trying to load the answers here. I'm just trying to look as objectively as I can. And we're going to do this for what they're telling me is a spit in the ocean. So if I've looked at this thing right, and maybe I haven't, but if I look at this thing, the way I see it, I can't find any support for a cost-benefit analysis of a reservoir being used on the site. Again, hopefully we'll continue to dialogue and explore, and maybe there's something that we've missed here, but that's, as I say, kind of my takeaway on it. We've talked about residential development. It's currently zoned, as you know, industrial, DRGR, 1 unit for 10 acres. We mine through 2020, at least through then, whatever. I think David went through this stuff already, that's the number under the category of zoning. If approved, we'd go to a rezoning after the comprehensive plan and have a developer agreement that would specify exactly who does what. We had started this development agreement actually last year when we stopped to wait for the Baraka report. I look at opportunities. Again, I'm trying to be unbiased, but I see these as really positive opportunities. Number one, we're going to bring utilities to this area along with the other developers, but we're going to be a lion's share of it since we're such a large piece. So future septic and well go away. These preserve and wetland areas are enhanced and maintained because now there's a mechanism, i.e. the homeowners association, to spend the money to continue this maintenance and spraying the exotics, et cetera. There's the potential for these public supply wells that Dave Depew briefly touched on, that with economic viability they can be produced around the site. We've talked about a little bit about low-impact development and utilizing best management practices in coordination with this development. There's transportation infrastructure improvements that can be made, potential for recreational opportunities, and a really nice community. This is not going to be, if development is allowed of any density, this is not going to be an inexpensive community. I mean, the land is not cheap. The cost of development is definitely not cheap. You have these homes around these lake areas that are going to be, not small little 1,500 unit homes. These are going to be large, very nice homes that I think will be an enhancement to the city and certainly to that area. In terms of economic impacts, they told me not to do this, but I can't help it. It's in my DNA. It's just, if you look at, going backwards. Per 1,000 units of approval, there's almost $11 million, $10.8 million of impact fees across the board that get levied, over the course of development. 350,000 was used incorrectly, frankly. It was very conservative as what the cost, what the value of a home might be. That's probably the value of a lot. But certainly the value of the homes are going to be far in excess of that. But at 350, there's $3.1 million that comes as a rough lineage, a millage amount, with this other $5 million district surcharge. So when you add 11 and 3 and 5, you're coming almost to $20 million of money for 1,000 units that, as near as I can tell, would be money you could spend in other areas. I don't, these things came up. I can't tell you I fully understand exactly what they are or what the impacts are, but they seem to be real strong points for a lot of people in the community that are places that could be money well spent versus all the money we spent at the mine. For what benefit, I have trouble understanding, at least as a reservoir. The other alternative is I don't think there's any industrial commercial reality that'll happen anytime in the even remote future. So if some reasonable residential development doesn't occur, there's really only one alternative left, I think, and that's for us to mine it out, continue to mine out the full reserves that are there. The opportunities for that is continue to maximize the mine, and that is positive support for local and regional development. Bonita and areas proximate to Bonita will have a source of aggregate, which without the mine in the future, we'll have to go elsewhere for it. There's some benefit to having that. There's no added residential traffic, of course, with the mine, but the truck traffic remains, which is not inconsequential, but nevertheless, that is one of the positives that would happen out of that. The impacts, if you will, oops, I keep going the wrong way. You get the wells, you get the septics, you don't get the utility extensions. The restoration is limited to what has been described. And frankly, you take all those opportunities that were listed and just say they go away. So rather than list them and say you don't have this, you don't have that, I just thought it would be easier to say we finish mining, we produce all the aggregate that we can, helps the local community, but at the end of the day, we'll have 127 houses around a particular lake. The rest of the land kind of will be used, I guess, as just sort of general rec area, but it certainly doesn't optimize economic value. I don't think it optimizes any of the water issues that have been before the task force here. So anyway, without belaboring this, that at least at this point of our understanding and research is kind of the takeaways I see from what the mining situation could or could not be.
George, I understand from your comments, and maybe you can clarify, if you're given the development opportunity, you would stop mining sooner than 2020?
My first question would be if and this would be of the city.
Well, I'm sure there's a lot of ifs and what ifs and.
The likely purchasers of the mine are going to be, as a residential community, are going to be builder developers. They're not going to be interested in continuing mining much past, let's say maybe it's another year or two as they're getting their final engineering done and whatever off-site engineering has to be done, but they're not in the business of mining. So I wouldn't imagine they're going to be interested in continuing to invest in plant and equipment and all the things they have to do to keep this mining operation. They're going to want to move. So I would think the answer to your question would be would be yes. And let me also add one thing. This is, if you all said, go to Marv, make it happen, everything's great, we shake hands, everybody's happy, this is a very long-term project. And the money that can come in, the longer, if that's the path that is chosen, the longer this takes to happen, the longer that money is going to sit out there. Because, I mean, let's say the comprehensive plan is lifted. Well, I don't know, between that and the rezoning, that could take the better part of a year. Then you got the engineering to do. Then you got the off-site engineering to do. And then you have the off-site work that's probably going to need to be done before a lot can be done here. Then you got the on-site work to be done. It could easily be 3 or 4 years, maybe more, before the first single-family house, if whatever house is actually even being available for sale. And by the time this thing hits its prime, it's 7, 8 years from now. So this isn't something that's going to happen in the best of scenarios real fast, unless all of a sudden the city changes its processes that we can move very quickly through it. But even that, there's still way too much work that has to be done to finish the shaping of the mine and doing everything else before anybody can really do anything on this site. Any other questions?
Well, and I would just reiterate that you will be meeting after this meeting to talk about reservoirs, though it sounded like your mind was pretty much made up on that. Hopefully
No, it's not my mind. I'm just,
Okay.
Do
just
you all
in
see
looking
things?
looking at your slides. But anyway, there will be more discussion on that. And also, Jim Beaver of the Regional Planning Council, they had identified the mine as a potential reservoir. So I agree. I think further discussions to have Greg Rawl and Jim Beaver and others who have ideas about this continue with interaction and dialogue on this before any minds are made up completely.
Absolutely.
George, let me thank you for all the fine work you and your staff put together, bearing with my silly questions or
No,
lack
they
of
weren't
maturity questions, but very valuable, and I learned an awful lot from your presentation. So thank you again for all your fine work.
Great, well, thank you all.
And thanks for having us out there, too. It's an impressive operation that, you might want to consider. You've got some detractors in the public who might benefit from a similar experience, so you might want to consider that opportunity in the future.
We've been up here far too long, and I'm not going to do what I was going to do. I was just going to walk through some of these developments, but I wanted to show you an answer to a question earlier. This property over here is the old Corkscrew Woods mine. Bella Terra is over here on the left-hand side. This is Corkscrew Road across the top of the development, and it meets Alico just right about there. You can just barely see this little white dot here, this little white dot there. There's a little bump out right there. There's another little white dot and a bump out there. There's another one down here. Those are the twin pairs of water wells that go into the water table and the lower Tamiami aquifers that are being used by Lee County Utilities currently. And if you need details about them, Dave Brown can provide you details, but those are all potable water wells. They're paired wells going into those two aquifers and drawing water from them, pumping them over to the Lee County Corkscrew water treatment plant, and then pumping them back out as potable water.
Now, that was Bella Terra there on the left-hand side?
This is Bella Terra right here, yes, sir.
Okay.
So, and what's happening in Corkscrew Woods now is this is now, it's Corkscrew Lakes, I think, or something like that is what they're calling it. Shores, Corkscrew Shores. Okay, sorry. At any rate, so that's all going to be residential in here. This area down here is being restored and is going into preservation, but that's all going to be residential. So you can see the residential there. There's going to be residential on this side as well. So the potable water wells are right there by the residential activity. And what happens is they benefit from having this water column over here that they can use to pump out of. So that's all I was going to try and get in here with this. But we're done unless you've got specific questions. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You are getting copies of this, right?
Yes,
Yes.
in fact,
Yep.
John's got it already. So.
All right. Do we want to, oh, you got it, John, thanks. So we'll move on, talk about the LDO amendment application, if anybody's got comments on that. We've already addressed Dave's questions on the mine operation, so I think we're good there.
And I would just ask maybe that we keep this as sort of a standing item as the mine talks with experts and just bringing back some of the dialogue and conversations from that, just as kind of a standing issue.
That's up to you. I'd love to hear how your conversation goes, but sure. And then, John, I'm sure you'll update us as this LDO application goes through the process with the city?
Yes,
Okay.
that's community development, just to keep us in the loop on it.
Perfect. I know I saw that email. I'm just reminding everybody, kind of. Good. Any questions on this? Or, I mean, I thought it was fairly straightforward, so. Nothing. All right, we'll move on. Nicole, did you want to talk about your comments, or were you?
Well, I think I've kind of gone over my comments in bits and pieces, but just in looking at the opportunity when I did the mine tour, and thank you for spending so much time with me during the tour and afterwards. I think we had a lot of good interaction and bouncing ideas back and forth, but my thought is you only have 4,700 acres of Bonita DRGR. And in that, you have several large landowners. And so, in my mind, making this whole thing work, it's a big puzzle. And you have to have those large pieces being a part of the solution, or else it's just not going to come together and work. So I provided the committee the Regional Planning Council's 10-year work plan. They had identified the mine as something that they would like to acquire for a reservoir. I didn't hear back from Jim Beaver of the RPC for additional details as to how that reservoir would work. But Roger Kopp is here today, and he's going to be sitting down with the mine folks to explore that further. So, we'll bring back to the committee some of the thoughts from that process.
Great.
I don't know if this comes under member items and reports or whatever, but I had the opportunity this weekend to drive over to Wellington, across 80 and back again, and FDOT's been doing a lot of work in expanding that Route 80 into 4 lanes, and along the sides of it, where it used to be 2-lane and a lot of canals that just moved water quickly, they've now done, and I was talking to Dave about it, but he didn't have a lot of information on it, and a lot of, I think what Fred had mentioned before, it looks like some of the farm fields are being used to store water. There are filter marshes that are being developed along it. And it occurred to me that an opportunity might exist within the DRGR, and possibly in conjunction with some of these ideas, if there was some development allowed in some of the larger parcels, that it would offer some financial money, or we could actually go through the city and get some grants to purchase willing seller properties of 10 acres and use them to store water on, because that they wouldn't require the excavation and the expense of the mine. We start collecting properties within the DRGR, transfer their development rights onto more clustered development to keep it from this problem that I have with the whole urban sprawl idea, and then using those properties. And it was done really in a very natural way. Everything's banked very softly. Nothing's in a perfect rectangle. It's very attractive. The filter marshes are alongside it, and it would allow us the opportunity to use more of those individuals, which would stop one person from putting one house on, and then we could also then afford the BSU to bring in the water and sewer. And it's another alternative to keep in mind that is actually something we could start biting off with a little less expense than trying to purchase the mine, and then purchase the equipment to pump the mine. This is a sort of a smaller piece-by-piece addition to it. And I tried to get in touch with the head of of this plan that's going on for FDOT, but he was in Sarasota today and couldn't return my call, so I am going to pursue that.
Nicole, isn't there sources for available to purchase large tracts of land for large reservoirs? Isn't that a possibility?
Well, I think so. I mean, at the state level, I think a lot of funding has really dried up, but, I think there are grant opportunities. I think that with Amendment 1, which is going to be on the ballot, that provides opportunities for maybe larger parcels. But I certainly think, one of the things that might be a possibility is if we can get a number of kind of interrelated ideas and projects together for the Restore Act grant application. And something that I was going to bring up, the Jefferson Flowway. And thank you, Charlie, for taking probably all of us out there. It was really great to actually physically be walking down the middle of that currently dysfunctional, but I think easy to restore flowway system. The Jefferson Flowway, to me, is a no-brainer. You have Part 1 completed, just need to take it to the next step. And so I think having something like that, something like Tori's idea, I think that all of these things are good pieces to the puzzle, and having it as kind of a package deal, hopefully each individual recommendation.
What I'm talking about is purchasing 30, if that was our goal, 300 acres, 30 10-acre parcels, and interweaving them in the DRGR. They don't even have to be necessarily contiguous. They're just sites that, I think this was mentioned before when we were having I think Mr. Irwin mentioned it, but then when I'm actually driving by and seeing it, it's very picturesque. I know it's useful because of all the meetings we've had, and I think it's doable. I think that it's going to require that the residents of the city of Bonita Springs want to pay for it. But all of these things we're talking about are going to require being paid for. And so wherever that funding is going to come through, but it's an opportunity. I think this is what everybody's been talking about, is buying it and making it attractive to the property owner to sell it willingly, and then thinking, okay, well, all we have to do is do a little bit of gradiating on it, and we could have it not in one great big hole. It would just be filtering, and storing. So
And so, Tori, maybe you can follow up with
I am going
Wellington
to,
and
for
find
sure,
out,
yeah.
or if it's FDOT or
Because
whoever.
this is, and I agree with you completely, after reading so much about the Jefferson Flowway and hearing about it over the years and having that wonderful tour of it, this should have been done a long time ago.
Do we need to have that put on our calendar to talk about Jefferson Flowway? And the
I
cost
actually was
and the dollars involved?
Well, I was going to ask that because it isn't on our agenda, even though it was our homework. So I guess that was an oversight on my part. Should we just put that on the agenda for next week?
No, and actually, I didn't put it on the draft agenda because I'm still waiting for some information from Public Works on where we are with the talks with FDOT on that.
Okay, so maybe we can talk about that at a
And
future
I was
date.
going to ask about that on the June
Perfect.
2nd to conclude that.
One last comment about what we're talking about. I think, I'm trying to make this come out right. The city has had for a long time two choices where to put money. And I think that we really have tended to put too much money into widening roads and not taking care of this other stuff. If you took care of the other stuff, then you would have more development. It would be good development. You would get the impact fees, and you could put that into widening the right roads. But I think we're going to have to invest in the community to take care of some of these problems. If we do that, then a lot of the things that Tori's concerned about would be rectified.
Are you talking about the roads, or are you talking about
No,
the
what I'm saying-
water?
What I'm saying is, I would rather see the city in a lot of cases spend money on doing things like fixing the Jefferson Flowway
Oh, I
and some of these
totally-
other things, rather than widening roads which if we didn't widen them and we really had to widen them later because of development, the developers would have to pay for it because it would be, it would overload the roads. Instead, we're widening the roads first, which makes it less money for the developers to
Well,
put up.
I agree, I can hear what you're saying, but I'm going to just say this right here on the record. In my experience within the city of Bonita Springs, the major concern with a lot of citizens has been in keeping their taxes down and in not spending a lot of money and in government light. And yet, there's always a big kerfuffle at the meetings and a lot of buses, people come in and they want everything to be made right. But nobody wants to pay for it. And so, no, just wait a sec, because I got to have my say here.
Okay.
The Jefferson Flowway, a lot of these things we've been studying, the information has been there, it has been studied, it has been recommended, and there has not been always the action taken because there hasn't been the will behind it to take the action, or it's been politically unattractive. So for me, we're always in jeopardy of this going back up on a shelf, because once we start saying, okay, this is a great idea, we should do the Jefferson Flowway. I mean, even FDOT didn't put the connection under the road when they paved Kent Road. So you always get to this point where these ideas are good, but then the feasibility comes back and the money comes back. And this will only be a waste of all of our time if everybody then says, oh, well, you know, I'm not going to mention all the things I see going on in the city right now, which are very costly, but it's a burr under my tail.
That's my point.
Yeah.
I said that I think we need to refocus our priorities, take care of some of these other things first. If you do that, the other things will follow anyway.
And I think that some of this funding to purchase some of these properties for water could come through a private-public agreement between possible well and potable water sources with an amount of development around something like this. So it's a partnership that I'm still looking at is somehow of funding it, because, as I say, it's 20 years I've been watching this not get funded.
Well, sometimes you also have some agencies that we need their cooperation. Sometimes they don't want to cooperate. So I think that's something we need to be cognizant of is it's not always the city's choice to get something done. It requires some other agencies.
No, I'm not blaming one person or another. I'm just saying that it always gets stuck in the same place. And it's certainly not the same board, and it's certainly not the same members of the city council all the time. But it still gets, it's like Nicole was just saying, that Jefferson Flowway is a no-brainer, and it hasn't been done. So it's a question of funding.
Let's make that our motto, get it done.
Get it done, that's right.
Right. To discuss future meetings?
Well, I tried to get a consensus
sorry.
of the board, and based on the response I've gotten, it looks like we'll go ahead in June for the 2 meetings, June 2nd, June 16th, but then July we'll have one, and August we'll have one, and that would be July 14th and August 11th, if that works. And then in July and August, we can talk about whether or not in September you want to stick with one or start ratcheting back up. But if that's okay, that's what we're going to go with now.
I'm sorry that I didn't get back to you on the July meeting. Is there any way it could be the week before?
I recommended week before.
The week before?
I have a conflict there, John.
I have a conflict with the
10 to
14th.
I know, Dave, I got yours.
All right.
I
I'm
think
sorry, I
late
didn't get
on,
back to you.
after I had put this together already.
I
So I
won't
didn't know.
be out if it's the week before. I won't be able to make it, but
Yeah, there were some other folks who weren't going to be able to make it the week before, but
Yeah, I don't think I'll be here on the 7th either.
I won't be here on the 14th.
Want to push it to
Could
the
we-
21st?
yeah.
21st?
I'll
works.
do whatever you guys tell me to do. But
The 21st would be great for me.
okay, so we'll look at July 21st.
Let's pencil it in for the 21st.
I don't know what the airline schedule is, but
7:21 and 8:11 sounds still okay?
Yep.
Still sounds good.
There you go. And in terms of the presentations then, I think we've got, well, let me not assume. June 2nd will be Kevin Irwin. We've asked him to come back and give us a status update on the work that he's doing. As a matter of fact, He'll be going to the city council then 2 days later at their meeting on the 4th. It's almost then the due date on his contract term, so I assume that we'll have something close to a finished product at that point for him to talk to us about. I tried reaching out to Cullum, the professor at FGCU that you had indicated, but I haven't heard back, so I will try again. And we've had some other recommendations in terms of getting folks from crew and a couple other things, so I will try to fill them in for July. Might even double up on the June 16th. Again, we're looking at Eric Livingston on June the 16th, but we'll try to double up on that one too. So unless there's any other ones that you want me to try to bring back or see for the first time or double up on, we've got June taken care of, so we're looking at July and August to fill in those blanks, and that's what I'll start to do.
What were the dates again, please?
July 21st.
July 21st. June dates?
June is
2nd.
June 2nd and June 16,
June 2 and 16.
July 21, and August 11.
I will be on an airplane on the 21st. I'm hoping I'd land at noon or earlier. I don't know what my schedule is now. Maybe we might delay the opening if I'm.
You let me know what your schedule is.
I
If
will.
we need to adjust a little bit, I'm sure we can try to figure something out.
Thank you.
That's all I had.
Oh, good. Member items and reports?
I have a couple, actually. Obviously, Dennis wasn't able to be here. He had let us know that this was going to be a conflict for him. Something about an anniversary, I think, if I remember right. But he did ask me if I could distribute a couple of things for you, for the task force to consider. I hadn't included some of this in the packet because, frankly, my thought was, for example, is some comments about Jefferson Flowway. I was trying to kind of combine all the input we had on Jefferson Flowway to include it as one agenda item, but Dennis did ask that I distribute his stuff beforehand, so I will. So you'll see that, and Nicole, I took the liberty of attaching your pictures to his comments,
Okay,
because I
great.
thought the pictures were really worth looking at. I'll include them again in the packet for next meeting, since we will be talking about Jefferson Flowway again. I'll also distribute his second version at some parking lot items. And the third thing I have from Dennis is his comments on some information that had been sent out, it looks like to all the task force members on Sunday, the 11th. It was comments, by Margaret Slattery, I guess distributed by Deb McLean, and Dennis added some comments of his on that. Again, he asked that I distribute them, so that's what I'm doing. You can take those and pass them down. There should
Okay.
be 6 of each.
How does this divide up? Oh,
There's 3 different things, just take one of each.
okay. 1,
That kind of makes sense?
2. Yes, it does now,
All
sorry.
right, thanks. So that's all I have on member items.
All right, staff updates, your floor too.
Okay, you've got some of the information that you had asked for. The first thing is just Audrey's status on the wellfield protection ordinance, and obviously as that moves forward, Audrey can keep us posted on that. I didn't include the draft that she's got at this point because obviously that's still a work in progress. It's available if anybody wants it, but it'll come back to you obviously before it's finalized. Restore Act was mentioned again today. You heard from our representative on the Restore Act committee at the last meeting. We've been in touch with the county representatives who are running that. They are the staff liaison for that county-wide group. Actually, it's a region-wide group. And they assure me that there will be plenty of opportunity for this group to take a look at 2 things. One is the criteria that they're going to be using to kind of weigh the different kinds of projects to make sure they're eligible for Restore Act dollars and then also match up our local priorities. And then we'll also be asked to submit a list of potential projects to be funded through Restore Act. We already had a couple of public works projects that are in the preliminary list, but that list is not final yet, obviously, so it'll come to you. And things like Jefferson Flowway, if it meets the Restore Act criteria, obviously can be melded in and made part of that. There is no harm, by the way, we do this all the time, there's no harm in putting the same project in different baskets of potential funding and then seeing which one comes through first, if at all. So it doesn't mean that if we put Jefferson Flowway, for example, in Restore Act, it doesn't mean we can't also look for other funding for it at the same time.
Right.
And then the last thing was just a copy of a notice that came in through the Water Management District that I thought would be of interest, so I included that in your packet.
Now, is all you got, you only got the notice, you didn't get the actual proposed rule change, or?
I thought there was a link to it. I could be
Oh, okay.
wrong, yeah.
Okay, I'll check that.
Can I ask, is the parking lot a place to store ideas that we might recommend?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, one that I would like to mention is that I don't know how to phrase this all politically correctly, but we might suggest to the city council that they write a letter of support in favor of South Florida Water Management being able to get on with finishing the work that they're trying to do and getting a priority towards the funding. I believe that it would help them if they had the support of the city council behind them to be able to accomplish the work that they would like to do, that they've been intending to do, and I think it would help, right?
I think I got you. I
Okay.
understand what you're saying.
And we need to be cognizant of the dates, because the calendar, but by the time we're done, it's going to be too late.
Yeah.
So we might want to consider.
Those kind of things might be something that even apart from your
Parking lot.
package of recommendations to go to council at the end of your work, we might want to pick and choose some of these things to fast track them, because as Scott mentioned, it might help in their timing when they're going forward. And I'll leave that up to Phil to let us know when he needs something like that.
He let us know, or he talked to me and let me know it was coming up pretty soon. So to the extent we need to do that, we should probably figure out, I think we need to narrow
Well, we should
what that
definitely talk
support
about that at
is.
the next meeting then.
Okay. Maybe we should have Phil come in and talk about I think it's the Southern Crew property restoration that they're coming up on some deadlines for.
I can ask him just to get me something in writing that
That's
talks
why he
about-
doesn't have to
yeah,
present,
so he
but
doesn't
yeah,
have
just
yeah.
to
Mhm.
provide.
But you're right,
some
we
input.
might want to pull some of those recommendations out and kind of fast track them if obviously there's a consensus to do so, if it fits in with somebody's timing on going forward with something. So thank you very much for that. And just generally speaking, you can communicate with me in any way you're comfortable in getting me your running list of proposed parking lot items. I've got some in writing from some folks. I've also made running lists of things, and I'm keeping kind of an inventory as you discuss things, kind of like I heard today, the potential of buying 10-acre
Yeah, I was going
parcels
to say,
from
Tori,
Williams.
I think you intend that to be a parking
Yeah.
lot issue.
I do.
And
Yeah.
I've already got that on my list, so.
And I'll provide you, I intended to for this meeting and didn't, but I will get my list to you.
Which leads me to the last thing I have on my list, which would be for the next meeting agenda on the 2nd. Again, we have obviously the minute approvals. We'll have Kevin Irwin. I wasn't planning a second presentation because frankly, I thought Kevin is probably going to have quite a bit of material, hopefully for us. We'll be talking about Jefferson Flowway. You have your reading list for Jefferson Flowway already that you looked at, and I'll package up whatever information I can from Public Works. Do you want me to include as an agenda item the parking lot items so far, or are we still kind of,
I
is that
think
premature?
if we can skip that
Mhm.
and push that to the following meeting, and then next meeting talk about, to the extent we can get information from Phil, anything for the Southern Crew restoration projects that we want to ask City Council to propose, and then maybe we can do a mid discussion
Good.
update.
Mhm.
Just my thoughts. Everybody
Yeah.
agree to that? Okay.
Good.
John?
Yes, sir.
John Domer and I have had discussions at different times, and I think I asked about it before. Can we get someone from the city that would explain to us about this water storage of 1.5 inches, how all that relates to developments?
I'm not following you, I'm sorry.
Well,
1.5 inches.
when you come in with a development,
Oh, Okay, I think I follow you. The city regulation that they store beyond the 1 inch, I think that,
It's 1.5.
right, okay. Yeah, I think community development would probably give us a pretty concise summary of that. I don't know if it needs to be a presentation, or maybe I just get something in writing from them. Would that work? And then they're usually here for questions and answers.
Yeah, I guess that would work.
Okay,
Anything else, John? That's it?
it for me.
All right, public comment?
Hi, I'm Deborah McLean. I'm the publisher of the Banana Peel. And when we first started all of our meetings here with this particular group, there was difficulty mentioning the word sprawl. I'm so glad to see you are at ease and understand that sprawl and water are hand in hand. So I thank you, especially Tori, today. But I would like to read you something because of that incident when our former chairman told us we couldn't talk about sprawl or anything north of the city boundary, but you know, water does run our direction. An oddity has popped up, I'm reading this, about land use scenarios that are currently under public review. Alternative B, not A, not C, has the Eastern Bonita Springs DRGR being developed as infill. Now, this is a crucial word. As best as I can tell, not me, there is a proposal to boost density in that area under a proposed by private contractors that has the Bonita citizenry up in arms. The alleged purpose of increasing the density by multiples is that the new development will provide for better water regime. I am a doubter, and the issue will be handled in the appropriate forum. What is of concern is that as of now, Bonita's plan does not forecast growth in that area, nor has its population growth forecast indicated any compelling change in volume to need this change for the city's economic assumptions. In the olden days, existing plans were the source for population distribution. Since speculative changes in density beyond that only work toward the advantage of particular and unidentifiable property owners, which created its own set of political problems. Using the MPO process for such purposes usually has no good outcome. Are there any working papers wherein Deborah can come and examine to see how the intrusion into and conversion of the entire Bonita DRGR was considered infill? That's a serious request. The word infill should not be used with the DRGR. It is just raw land and it protects our water. The infill is Bonita Beach Road, New 41, and Old 41. We have on the records a total population or build out of 120,000 units. We are only at 48,000 population. So adding more people stresses our existing infrastructure and increases the property taxes for the people that are here now. Thank you.
Hi, Donna Stone, Worthington External Affairs. I have 5 things. My first is a question for David Brown. I guess I was naive in understanding the layers that you were talking about. We get rain, boom. 3 hours later, all signs of the rain are gone. That's that little tiny surface that you were talking about in the beginning. Now, the reason that we have the sheet flow, if I'm understanding you, is because we have a low absorption rate in the lower level. Is that correct?
No, we have a low absorption rate at the very top.
Okay, because, I mean, I look out at any area that we go by, and literally 4 hours after you have rain, there's no sign of it whatsoever.
Neighborhoods and areas since 1984, when stormwater permitting occurred in the state of Florida throughout the water management district.
If we're going to have.
I know, yeah, Ms. Stone, Ms. Stone. if
I
you-
was just trying to understand what he was talking about with the upper and the lower levels.
I understand. You're welcome to maybe ask him some questions afterwards. If you can
Okay.
just
All
provide
right.
comments to the task force, that would be great.
I'm sorry. The other thing that I am excited to hear about is Nicole and Tori and Fred actually talking about an action. You're finally talking about doing something, and that was the Jefferson Flowway. Excellent. Let's get it funded, let's get it done, let's get it connected, let's get it finished. I think that that is absolutely what we were talking about with the busloads of people you were talking about. We want to get the water right, and that was our number one priority. So buying 10-acre lots, developing them as filter marshes, putting filter marshes alongside existing roadways to help in absorption. All of that is what we are looking for. We are not necessarily that, the density, yes, that's a major concern. But the main thing is getting the water right, getting it protected, getting things done, not just talking about it. And I think that that's an excellent, excellent thing, that you're actually starting to talk about that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Charlie Strader, Kent Road. Quite professional presentation, obviously. I didn't quite catch it. It was a little fast. Supposedly, it's not just bermed on the north and east side, the mine property specifically. That they are saying they retain water totally, but they also, I think, mentioned that they can hold up to a 3-day rain event. I think they mentioned the 25-year. I think that relates to like what we call our 25-year flood. Like say in 1995, you drive up there, the parking lot's that deep. Obviously that water goes down Bonita Grand Road from that area. So maybe you guys can figure that out as you go forward in the future. And I think they misspoke, but I think it's a 25-inch or 25-year flood 3-day event. So regardless, any development's not going to let themselves flood no matter what we do there in the future. So the water's going to go somewhere. It's how we deal with that water. Second, I'm still a little unclear. You've got 3 major types of land use, let's say for simplification: raw land, open water, and developed land, such as medium density residential. How do each of those affect recharge? Obviously, we know more impervious surfaces slows down recharge. We know that, but kind of what are the numbers so we can start thinking in those aspects? Also, there seems to be hovering around this whole issue, if we don't get more density, there's going to be septic tanks, which definitely have some impacts, and more septic tanks are more septic tanks. But I don't quite understand if 100 homes are built in any of these larger tracts, which they're already vested for, why would BSU not connect? I mean, it's in their charter or the comp plan to do that. I know people a lot live in much more rural, dispersed areas than our DRG are that have, septic and wastewater management, and so I don't really quite understand that. Which kind of leads one into the bigger picture of at what point does 127 septic tanks, as far as pollutant loads, equal 3,000 homes? We're not even started talking yet about the impervious surfaces that come along with 3,000 homes. Because if you do that, then you're going to say, well, you need to capture the trips, you're going to have commercial lands, you're going to have more roads. All those come with a pollutant load cost. So where does that balance occur? I spend a lot of time trying to get that. It's hard to get the exact numbers. We'd all like to say, oh, it's this or that, but it's not always black and white. I'll try to do it. There's 2 people you may want to take a note on this person's name. His name is Bill Mitch, M-I-T-S-C-H.
John's
you already
mentioned
discussed
while
it?
you were outside a minute ago that he's working on that. He's already called him today, right?
John's the man.
The Professor Mitch.
That wasn't.
No, it's different, Professor.
Oh, you were on the other one. Well, I just sent you that email today. Maybe you didn't get it.
Okay.
You're right, I didn't get it if you sent it today.
We're working on it. I sent him an email today about
Oh,
it.
wonderful. He's FGCU, one of the world's premier wetland restorationists, very well respected in his field, and he's even did mine restorations. I guess the other one, which to follow up, is the bigger issue again, impact fees. You know, I mean, yes, if you put in developments to raise your tax base, you get a lot of impact. I don't know, so we get 20, 30. $20,000-$30,000 worth, $20-30 million worth of impact fees. Your bridge over your I-75 there at Terry Street was what, $100 million alone. So it's it kind of one thing leads into the another with that. So when you really get bored and haven't found enough to read with what you're getting already, you can Google, does development pay for itself? And what types of developments do actually long-term help a city out? Because that's what we're hopefully looking at here, is not the next building cycle or growth. It's our city for 100 years from now. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Anyone else for public comment?
Oh, John West.
John West.
Hello, John.
How are you? Can I ask the consultants a question?
If you could keep your comments to here, you can talk to the consultants afterwards if
Afterwards,
you'd like.
okay. I just wanted to mention that if this monitoring well, 2194, I've spent a lot of time looking at that. And if they got the information from the USGS, there is about a 15-year gap when there was no readings at all from that monitoring well. And I thought you should know that. Also, I wanted to comment on what Charlie said just now. There is a berm there at that mine, and there is a way of getting into the mine and out of the mine where there is no berm. So water has to come out of the mine, and it does flow down Bonita Grand, and it does go down into the Imperial River, down Kent Road, etc. On the question of the present status of the mine, it is clear that they have the intention of selling the mine. It is clear that they plan on getting some kind of development permits for it. There was discussion about them continuing to mine or the city buying the mine and running it. I don't think that's on at all. I think the mine should finish mining and then somebody will buy it, and or somebody will buy it or put it under contract before. But I don't think anyone else will run the mine but the people that run it now. Lastly, there is an amendment I'd like to put into the minutes on page 4, top of page 4, where it says, but withdrawals from surficial do affect water budget and the water balance. That word effect should be affect and not effect. That's all.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
For the record, Bill Morris. I don't want to get into a situation where we're balancing and counterbalancing everybody's points, but I feel it is important just to make sure that you all understand the mine site does not have a stormwater discharge along its the path that was mentioned before. It simply does not exist. I've been the engineer of record of the mine for 11 years now. It is not designed, it is not permitted. I have not witnessed any stormwater discharge in that 11 years along the route that the gentleman before me described. So I would take that for what it's worth, but please understand that while it may give the appearance that due to the lack of a formal berm in that location, it simply does not behave that way. Thank you.
I have
you.
something to say there. I live there, and it does not come out of the pit. Because I drive down there all the time, and I walk my dogs down there. It runs along Bonita Grande from the surrounding lands, but I have never seen water running out that driveway where the trucks come through, and then the berms around that, except for that driveway. And it does not run, in my experience, and I'm out there all the time. I mean, it's right where I live, and I have to agree, I don't know where that idea is coming from. The water comes from around the outside, but I've never seen water running over Bonita Grande or down out of that driveway, so.
Thanks, Bill. Anyone else? Seeing none, we'll move on. Motion to adjourn.
All right.